Okay. I think you're present.
Is there a way to chat with him? Oh,
Alder Kalish, can you hear us?
I can hear you now. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so much. You are
Thanks.
present.
Okay,
Thank you. Moving on to our discussion items. Our first one is the update on federal funding resources. And I'm assuming, do you want me to talk about that, Brian, or would you like to take that one?
something that comes over to your police director.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Give us a very brief kind of overview of who we've seen.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we've been monitoring this very closely over the past week. Initially, on January 20th, President Trump signed a number of executive orders, including one that suspended payments under the Inflation Reduction Act grants for things such as electric vehicle infrastructure, and directed agencies to complete a 90-day review for alignment with the administration's policies. That was followed up by a memo that was issued on Monday of this week by the Office of Management of Budget that was directing federal agencies to put a pause on all federal disbursements, with the exception of payments to individuals, and Medicare and Social Security were specifically carved out. That pause was to go into effect on January 28th at 5 p.m. And there was and still is a lot of question about the full extent of that directive. That directive, in addition to putting the pause on the federal funding, also directed federal agencies to submit detailed information to the Office of Management and Budget by February 10th for any programs subject to the pause to be reviewed for compliance with the executive orders. And from a list provided through the Government Finance Officers Association, there were at least 2,600 different federal programs that were affected by that information request. Then on January 28th, a federal judge ordered a stay on the funding pause until February 3rd at 5 p.m. And the following day, on January 29th, OMB rescinded the original memo from the 27th. The executive orders still remain in place, and we are currently left in a place where there's a lot of uncertainty over what will happen after February 3rd, whether or not there'll be any additional or follow-up orders, and it appears likely that there'll continue to be legal action and challenges for both some of the executive orders as well as any federal funding pause. As far as the impact on the city of Middleton, I guess the good news for the city is that we do not heavily rely on federal funding for our ongoing operations. We do have strong fund balance and reserve levels. So if there would be a delay in federal payments, that gives us a cushion of funds to be able to weather any delays. Most federal funding that the city receives is for special projects, whether they be capital projects or special initiatives. Some of the initial areas that we identified that could be impacted if there is a delay in federal funding and action. One of the largest is the FEMA assistance the city is still working on achieving and receiving from the 2018 flooding. We just recently had our large Pheasant Branch Creek project completed with the review at the Wisconsin emergency management level. That was sent off to FEMA for their review and disbursement. If there are delays at the federal level, that could delay that process for planning or closing out those remaining grants. Other areas where we have grants or funding, various sustainability capital projects, EMS Medicaid reimbursement, special grants for the police department, airport project funding. And in the area of transit, the city of Middleton does not directly receive federal transit aid. We do receive state transit aid, and our partner, Madison Metro, receives a significant amount of federal assistance. So if there are any delays or issues with federal funding for transit, that could impact our service through our service provider, Madison Metro. We'll continue to monitor and provide updates as necessary. That gives an overview of where we're currently standing.
Does anyone have any questions for Bill?
I just want to say thank you. That was a really good briefing.
Yes, thank you so much. Nothing, then we're moving on to our presentation. We have Olivia Perry from the Dane County Regional Housing Initiative? No, Strategy, excuse me. She's going to talk about the Dane County Housing Initiative, and we welcome her.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Hello? Do I have to do this? Okay, okay. Hi, thank you, Mayor, Council, thank you so much for having me. Brian, thank you for the invitation. It's nice to see all of you. So today I was asked to talk about what an affordable housing action plan or an affordable housing plan could potentially look like. And so that will be my presentation today. I'll talk a little bit about the regional housing strategy. I did leave some fact sheets. We did leave some fact sheets from the regional housing strategy on your desk. I also have some executive summaries, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the regional housing strategy after, but really the focus is affordable housing action plan best practices. And just for clarification, when I say affordable housing, I'm not just talking about specifically subsidized housing. I'm talking about affordable housing and housing affordability. Because as we know, there's a lack of affordable housing for low to moderate income folks, but housing affordability is a huge issue. And so housing affordability can be affected in many ways, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but I just want to be clear about that. Does everyone have a sense of what affordable housing is specifically, the subsidized housing? I'm happy to just give a brief overview. Should I give a brief overview?
Go ahead.
Okay, so when we're talking about affordable housing, affordable multifamily housing, kind of the new housing development you see going up all over really Dane County, that housing is actually subsidized through typically WIDA tax credits. It's mixed income multifamily. So some of the units are available, say, to folks who are 30% of the area median income, some 60, some 80, and then all the way up to market rate. So it's mixed income multifamily housing. That's what we typically refer to as affordable housing. There's also affordable single family housing. And then when we're talking about that, we're talking about things like Habitat for Humanity, Madison Area Community Land Trust, housing that's being brought forward. That's typically less than 300 or 275,000. And so those are the distinctions for affordable housing.
But can you repeat that last dollar amount?
Yeah. So typically, well, there are differences of opinion about what an affordable single family home would go for. Some say less than 300. Habitat for Humanity is bringing them their units in around 260 to around 260. So depending on who the developer is, and that's their specialty, Habitat. So yeah, they're bringing in around 260 to a little less than 260. But it really depends on the size and the location and how much the land costs. But really, their focus is to provide housing for their future homeowners so they're only paying 30% of their monthly income on the mortgage, taxes and insurance. Okay, here we go. So, there we go. So I'm going to talk a little about what is an affordable housing action plan and what it'll do. Talk about some of the components that it would be helpful to include, a little bit about the approach and structure, and some considerations at the end just to think about in general. Yeah. So basically, up or down?
Down.
Down. Okay. So might have to aim it somewhere. There we go. Delayed. There we go. So what is it? So Affordable Housing Action Plan is a comprehensive 5-year action plan that really builds on your comp plan, housing chapter, a housing study if you have one. And it's a strategic guide and resource that will focus policy efforts, investments, partnerships, coordination, and ultimately results. Yeah, and it'll further articulate the tools that you've identified in your comprehensive plan, your housing chapter, and really just sort of expand out and go deeper in terms of detail. So what will it actually do? It's a comprehensive assessment of local housing needs. It will inventory and evaluate all the tools that you have available as a local government, and the levers from financial tools to policy levers. You will engage the community. It will engage the community for community feedback, review existing documents to help you identify the top concerns, priorities, housing targets, and action items. It will also should also include identification list of key stakeholders and partners and responsible parties in terms of implementation and a timeline for implementation. And again, I know you have a very recent housing chapter, comprehensive plan housing chapter. So the degree that you include that information or use that information or information for your housing study, certainly depends, on how you want to move forward. So these things are not to be separate, but the comprehensive plan is really the basis for moving forward and the guidance for moving forward. So the most important thing to start with the housing action plan will be the housing needs assessment. So as many of you know, are familiar with the regional housing strategy, we've produced a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of really important observations and insights came out of the regional housing strategy. However, we were bringing forward data on a regional level. So a housing needs assessment for Middleton would really be helpful and important to have a more detailed understanding of Middleton's housing profile, vacancy rates, understand what and where your affordable housing is located, history of rents, what is the housing supply gap at varying income levels by age, race. I did see that racial equity racial disparities was something you identified in your housing chapter and comp plan. So that's another place. You could look at home ownership by race. Again, the regional housing strategy identified for Dane County, two cohorts.
I have
Yeah,
a question, and it might be particular to Middleton. What I found at doors was that a lot of people that were in single family homes were renters.
Mhm.
And my assumption is that they own the home. So I'd be like, oh, as a homeowner, they're like, oh, no, I rent. And so I had to really learn to ask that sort of differently so that I wasn't assuming. So is there a way to capture that when you're doing this analysis? Because I feel like it might be higher than we know.
I think it is higher than
Mhm.
and we know, and I've never done the analysis, but I do drive around communities in Dane County a lot. And what I see, especially in some of the newer subdivisions, are these companies that have gone in and bought groups of homes in these
Yeah,
subdivisions.
I've heard of that.
And I am familiar with some of the names of those subdivisions. I mean, some of those names of those buyers. I have not done that analysis, but I think it's really important that we know that.
Well, from doors, I will tell you, I didn't hear those names really. The ones,
You didn't hear the owner or the management company's names.
no, I didn't hear national names. I heard a lot of them were independent, like small families who maybe owned a couple homes.
Hmm.
And then once I started asking, they usually owned 5 to 10 homes in the city. So it could be that a lot of our housing stock is rented out, but they are locals.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that as we think about these things,
Yeah.
if you're hearing about those Blackstone or other companies that are buying in large volume, that may not be our issue. They might be the local, long-term generational folks who are buying and then renting them out. And so we have to be cautious if that's the case.
Yeah.
Because these
Yeah.
are still our neighbors and.
Right. And I will share with you on the east side, about a decade ago, a real estate investment company opened. It was called Sarah Real Estate. And that's specifically what they attracted their investors for, is to buy up single family homes and rent them. And so I do know that it happens locally and it also happens nationally, but
Okay.
I think that would be a really important thing to include absolutely in your housing assessment.
I just appreciate that thought. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. And I didn't include everything that should be in your housing,
Mhm.
assessment in this, but the idea is that you really want to start with and get a really clear picture of what's happening on the ground in Middleton in a way that you can't with the regional housing strategy. And I brought up this slide because, countywide, we're seeing, the Gen Z cohort and the older cohort far outstrip the growth in those cohorts when you compare it to statewide. And currently Gen Z has overtaken the aging and growing population in Dane County. I don't know if that's the case in Middleton. Maybe it's the reverse in Middleton. I don't know. But that's why it's so important for, starting out with the housing needs assessment, specifically for Middleton, to get sort of a clearer picture on that. We had some really great data in terms of the renter housing supply gap for the county. And this shows that we had a 13,300 unit shortfall for our lowest income population. And then, you see all these people competing for this limited housing stock in the middle. It might be different for Middleton. You might have more higher income housing where you see 100 to 150 AMI. So that will be a really important thing to do, in terms of to understand specifically on the level of the city of Middleton. And this is the big squeeze. This is the sort of owner housing supply gap for homeowners. Again, you see people competing for that middle pie of housing, single family housing. These are the annual housing production goal for all the municipalities. Middleton, 318 units. I don't know what the 2024, do you know how many permits you did in 2024?
Not that high.
Yeah, right.
Probably closer to 105.
Yeah, it really dropped off with the interest rates soaring. Right, during the pandemic and right after the pandemic, there was just a huge amount of construction. And then as soon as the interest rates went up, there's just like this cliff. And typically you will see that in housing development. It's a very lumpy thing. And it really depends on so many different factors, whether it's interest rates or labor shortage or supply costs. It's typically a very lumpy thing. And then, breaking out, looking at your housing needs assessment by housing type. Wait, did I leave this one in here? Yeah, so currently in Dane County, I think we have around 65% of all of housing in Dane County is in multifamily. That has gone up. A decade ago, it was 59%. And so it's grown by 6% over the last decade, and that seems to continue to happen. So one of the most important things you'll want to inventory and assess are your financial tools, the tools that are available to Middleton to bring forward the housing that you want to see. I don't know when your ordinance, your TIF ordinance was last updated. Does anyone know when your TIF ordinance was last updated?
Bill can answer all.
Just a few. I don't think it was that long ago because I remember talking to you or talking to Daphne about that.
You mean our policy?
Yeah. Right.
That was in early 2021.
So it's fairly recent.
Yeah.
But the question you want to ask yourself is, what does it prioritize? How does it prioritize housing? What kind of housing does it prioritize? Does it prioritize specifically housing for 60% or below area median income? And then I do know that you guys are going to be closing TID number 3 not too long from now. And when is that? When does that close?
The resolution was issued in April of this year for the affordable housing extension, which would take the year of increment from this April to next year.
Right. And what was the increment that you received? Do you know?
It's
Around 10 million. Great. That's fantastic. So TIF extension funds are being used, all through municipalities all throughout Dane County for land banking, rehab, energy efficiency, infill. A lot of folks are creating revolving loan funds, gap financing for affordable housing. And then here's just a few examples. The Village of Oregon is funded a small multifamily rehab project. Our older multifamily is a really important part of our affordable housing stock. And so they funded some aging units in their community. They also did use their affordable housing fund, their TIF extension funds for habitat homes, preservation of historic structure, and then the remaining projects, they have money left over that does not need to be in a TID. Yeah. And then the Village of Wanakee created something called a Housing Betterment Fund. So it's a grant to their residents for rehab. Basically, it's a 1-to-1. So if your project was $10,000, they'll give you $5,000, and it is a grant. That started last year, and it's been very successful in the community so far. A lot of interest. And then City of Sun Prairie, for example, they are using their TIF extension funds to fund a satellite tenant resource center office so they can provide housing counseling and housing navigating services to their residents. They're also using it for administration of an anti-retaliation ordinance. And then they have a new position a couple of years ago, housing and economic development planner, that they're using that TIF extension funds to fund. Other sources that you'll want to identify and inventory for your affordable housing plan are looking at the WIDA programs and really describing these and what they can do and what the requirements are. The Board of Commissioners for Public Lands is also a great funding source for infrastructure. They fund everything from, all different types of infrastructure. They also, you can also use that money for refinancing existing liabilities that you have to reduce future borrowing costs. There's someone who I don't think a lot of people typically use, but they're a really great source of funds. And so is the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. They have a whole number of projects from affordable housing, multifamily housing rehab. They also have some retail products for residents to do rehab and down payment assistance. And then bond financing. CDAs typically have the capacity to have bonding authority, but it's bond financing is very expensive. So you want to use that for longer term projects, much bigger projects. Does your CDA have bonding authority?
That power has not been designated by the council. I think our ordinance could potentially allow for that, but not currently.
So someone else gets it. So right now, the city and the Dane County use bonding to provide gap financing for our affordable housing development projects. So the county this year has $15 million in their I want to say 15 million in their affordable housing fund, and I think the city has 20, and that's all through bond financing, and then ultimately it's paid back by the developer. But the interest we charge, both the city and the county, are very low, and so it makes it very competitive for financing and really helps affordable housing developers get over the finish line. So we also have the Dane County CDBG and home funds. I will share with you that no municipality and no developers, for some reason, it's very odd, applied for those funds in 2024. Habitat is typically applying for those funds to make, go forward. With Point Development, I don't know if North Point, very typical. No one applied for funds. So I encourage you to, look at those funds for 2025.
I'm sorry, what did you say? No one applied for what?
For those home funds in 2024.
Okay. Not one? Here, let's make sure we're on the mic. Really? Not one?
Not a single developer or municipality applied for the home funds in 2024.
So can we put that on our radar? Is that a good idea? All right, good. Yeah, all right, thanks.
And then this year in the 2025 budget, Dane County earmarked $8 million, an additional $8 million in the budget, apart from the Affordable Housing Fund, for projects related to affordable housing. The definition of what those projects will be is not clear yet. But I will tell you, in the last few years, in the 2024 budget, we earmarked $2 million for land banking for the Habitat for Humanity, and that it's taken a while to get through the legal process, but that I think is about to launch. So if there are areas where you want to do habitat in Middleton, know that there's land banking funds that they're receiving from the county in the $2 million worth. And then in the 2025 budget, we earmarked, we gave Madison Area Community Land Trust $2 million for land banking. That probably will take a little while longer, probably sometime maybe this spring. But they're both going to be using the same mechanism. So I think it's not going to take a year. It's taken a year to get this, wow, that smells good. Off to get that project off. But there's going to be $4 million, new $4 million for, single family affordable homes. So I urge you to look into that and contact those organizations.
Olivia, can I ask a question?
Yes.
When you talk about the land bank, would Middleton just identify just an empty lot, and that Dane County would then help us pay for that?
So I think the relationship, the land banking funding is, well, we don't have the program out yet, but it has to be a partnership between the municipality and the organization, right? So, you might identify a lot and then bring MACLT or Habitat in, and they'll be like, oh, that's great, or oh, no, I can't, or whatever, So there's, that partnership has to be established in order for that, funding to that purchase. And my understanding is that, at least initially, is that Habitat or MACLT actually does the purchase and they're reimbursed, but
And they're
we don't
reimbursed?
have the program guidelines yet, so I can't specifically answer that, but that was what was discussed at
Okay.
the beginning.
Okay.
But there might be an opportunity for the municipality to purchase that. But I do think that partnership, it can't just be like, we have this land, that is potentially what could happen with this new $8 million for the 2025 budget. But the 2 million for Habitat and the 2 million for MACLT is specifically for those agencies to develop, affordable single family homes, in Dane County.
Let me officially invite you back when that program is set up.
I'd be happy to come back when
Great.
I get the details. Sure.
Thank you.
And then of course there's state CDBG funds. Oh yeah, and again, with the Dane County, the new $8 million in 2025, it's going to take a while for that to be defined. But if there is a project that is burning on your, radar, I suggest that you let me know that, and potentially I could connect you with, that project. That $8 million is not in the Department of Planning and Development. It's in Housing Access and Affordability. So I could direct you to some staff there that you could talk about that with. But I do think that obviously the county really wants to address this issue. I think it's probably open at this point, where that 8 million is going. Maybe I think some of it's, definitely going to go to multifamily rehab. But I don't have a sense exactly. And so if there is a project that is burning a hole in your pocket, I would suggest reaching out to me, and I can connect you with the right folks. State CBG is also important resource for funding. I do think that Middleton, you guys got some state CBG funds years
Yeah,
ago.
we received a $3 million recovery grant.
Right, fantastic.
For the
I think
Mill-
those funds
Mill
are,
apartments.
oh yeah, from which ones?
The Mill Apartments,
Okay,
it's a
right.
MDC project on Century Avenue, right next to the grocery store.
Oh, that one. Okay, yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I don't think they have any more disaster recovery funds, but that was a really great scoop on your part. Yeah, and then there are other grants out there, and there are other foundations. There are foundations that are interested in affordable housing and workforce housing. I didn't list them, but it's going to be important to inventory those and make sure that you know what those resources are, so you can refer to them, so you can develop relationships with those foundations and other grants. The last thing I'll mention in the sort of financial toolbox that you'll want to inventory is public-private partnerships. Over the course of the last 12, 14 years that I've been working in affordable housing, I've really developed a lot of relationships with the private sector. And it's been really very beneficial, very galvanizing, and really increased the visibility of this issue. And since the regional housing strategy kicked off, I'm getting more sort of unsolicited, hi, I heard about the regional housing strategy. Can I meet with you? I'm from this foundation. I'm from this company. And that is unheard of. Usually I would reach out, and people were receptive. And like I said, I've developed a lot of partnerships over the last decade or more, but now I'm starting to hear that, people are coming to us. And so I think that there's a lot of potential in exploring what a public-private partnership could look like on a very local level. I work for the county, obviously. But if there are employers, if there are potential partners out there, because the large employers, the employers of Dane County really are starting to understand or, feel more acutely what their role is in this whole sort of housing crisis. Now, we're very happy that they are creating so many jobs. This is a slide that represents, the blue line represents the total employment in Dane County. The green line is the total households. And as you can see, the number of jobs is increasingly exponentially far exceeding the number of households. And this is all driven by our super successful private sector. So as I said, they're becoming increasingly aware of that. This is another statistic. Dane County jobs grew 14% in the same period between 2010 and 2021, while the states only grew 6%. So in that decade, we created 27% of all the jobs in the state. So again, I think they're becoming more and more aware, and I think potentially more receptive to overtures, to partnerships, to discussions about potential partnerships, about how we can whether it's maintaining housing stock, maybe, energy retrofits. These are very high touch relationships. Who at the local level would engage in those? I can't answer that question. I've been the person, in my department, and it's a different beast, of course, county versus local, but I do think that there's some potential, and I'm happy to talk in more detail if you ever want to have that conversation about how I've approached these relationships or what potentially could, some, initial opening salvos or discussions look like. So obviously you're going to want to inventory your land use and regulatory tools and make that an important part of your affordable housing action plan. These are just some of them. Land banking, does everyone know what land banking is? It's the idea that you purchase land for future development, hence the land and the banking. So, and then there's of course a density bonus. Sometimes you say, well, if you have more units, you might, give more money to parks or provide, some other asset or for the community. But you can also ask, market rate developers especially for a percent of their rents for X period of time. And then you could put that money towards your affordable housing fund. No one has done that in Dane County that I know of, but it would be fantastic to see. I have heard about it around the, other parts of the country. But at this point, I have not seen it in Dane County. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, can you describe like how that would work?
Yeah.
Because I just see us asking and being told, no, if there's no stick, like if we don't have the authority to say you need to do this, or is it something we could do through like TID financing? If they want financing, they've got to do this.
Right. So if a developer comes to you guys and says, I want to do 20 units and whatever, and then you say, well, if you want to do 24 or 28 units, I just need to take, 0.05% off your, ROI or your rent or 20% of your rents for market rate. This is, pretty sizable for the next 5 years, And that's just sort of, you give me this, I'll give you that. There's nothing that you have to do. I mean, sure, it has to be in writing and it has to be legal, but it is a potential source because we are building luxury apartment buildings all over the county. And I do feel like, if you're willing to go another few units, that could potentially, taking a small, very small cut, not too small, but and directing that to your affordable housing fund would be a great way to, expand or leverage something that's happening, constantly and all the time. So, yeah. And then of course, subdivision ordinance. I don't know when last time you updated your subdivision ordinance.
Underway right now. So
I had
I'm
a
all
feeling,
ears.
you guys are so ahead of the They are so ahead of the game. Anyway, so yeah, well, I mean, the idea is to update your, subdivision ordinance, you want to allow as much flexibility within that ordinance. Typically we've been, so monolithic, in terms of, single family lots being all of a certain size, laid out in such a way, and then the street widths are, X, and everyone has to have a garage, everyone has to do, all of these things. But I think the idea of updating it really is to include, all of the great things that you've just done in your zoning ordinance to allow for that to happen. And really emphasize, the idea that, mixed uses should be allowed and alley loaded, and this should just be standard operating procedure. Back in the day when we were growing up, when I was growing up, communities had all different size houses. They had alley loaded, they had non-alley loaded. There's, some were brick, some were, but we got away from that for so many years with the sort of in the 50s and the 60s when we started building single family homes. That whole idea of what now we call missing middle housing, has ceased to exist. And so now we're actually trying to get back to that missing middle housing. But I think the subdivision ordinance is a great way to do that. And to, not only allow for greater diversity of housing types with greater, a variety of different prices, and also, different sizes. And then also, the infrastructure costs, you could significantly introduce, reduce your infrastructure costs if you're reducing your street widths, if you're, allowing for, street widths, setbacks, lot sizes, shrinking all of those. And you've already done that great work in your zoning code. So fees and permitting, this is another, another area where you can potentially affect the amount of housing that's coming forward, at the speed it's coming forward, and the cost that it's coming forward. It will be helpful to review your impact fees, although something tells me you've already done that. Have you reviewed?
We kind of started with Baker Tilly on park impact fees.
Okay.
And then it kind of got put on hold for a little bit, so
Yeah.
we need to bring it back.
Yeah. So impact fees, whether you waive them, delay them, reduce them for an identified housing objective, say there's something that you ultimately decide you really want, well, then you get to go from, step 1 to step 5. And pre-development costs when you're developing is a huge, I think it's up to 20 or 30% of the actual overall development costs, all of those meetings, all of that time, the permitting, the reviews, the committees. So that's another way that, another idea that, you should think about, evaluate, kind of turn over it and consider. Expedited permitting. Again, the idea that developers are paying so much money upfront by having to go through all these review periods. If you can identify specific types of housing that that you want, and maybe even design standards to go along with them, that person shouldn't have to go, if that's what you agreed on and you said, that person shouldn't have to go through the whole process. So if you can expedite those processes, then they're going to get through that faster and potentially maybe realize some savings, but certainly bring forward housing quicker than, if they have to go through each of those steps. And then there's a thing called third-party pre-approval. And that's another way to deal with kind of the backlog that happens, in the whole development process. And that's, when you have a defined sort of product that you want to see come forward. Maybe it includes design standards, maybe it doesn't, but it's very, it's sort of all sewn up, rules, regulations, everything. Then you actually hire a consultant to make sure that they are dotting all the i's and crossing all the t's. So if you have limited staff, it frees up their time, and it also allows the development to go through more quickly. So that's called a third-party pre-approval process. Yeah. So fees and permitting. Oh wait, did we just do that?
Yes.
Oh. Okay, we have 2 of the same one, oh yeah, no, we're done. Okay, we're going back. We're going on to zoning. So these are just some of the things, and I think you have probably a lot of these in your new zoning ordinance, but that affect affordability. Having a mixed use district with varying lot sizes and uses, allowing for commercial can potentially impact the size and the type of housing you're bringing forward, whether it's rentals or townhomes or single family, reducing or eliminating parking requirements, creating 0 lot lines, reducing setbacks and street widths and allowing alleyways, reducing lot sizes in all single family districts to 3,000 square feet, and then allowing tiny homes, manufactured homes.
Olivia,
Yes.
what is a 0 lot line?
A 0 lot line is, so say you have, 2, what's it called? A twin home, but that are condos. It's like a townhome. So a 0 lot line would basically allow the 2 individual units to be considered separate, and therefore you can own them.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but if they're sharing a wall, and a lot of them not built to be owned, but in some cases they are or can be modified. But a 0 lot line allows those individual units to be
Separately owned. I love that. I think we need that.
So this one, the next one is when you're talking about affordable single family, I think it's really important that we kind of all collectively need to start to recognize that developing starter homes, first-time homes are not going to happen unless we start to make some considerable fundamental changes to our zoning codes. Whether or not we're willing to, whether or not we're, even willing to have the discussion, go ahead.
We did that last year. The council was very supportive, and we appreciate you saying that, especially to all the communities.
Yeah.
But we hadn't updated it since the 80s, and under the leadership of our planning director, she was phenomenal.
Yeah. So just a general question, does your single family ordinance allow for no garages or 1-car garage? Does it allow housing to be built on a slab versus a basement? Does it allow for small format housing, 600 to 1,200 square feet? The answer is probably yes. You guys are very on top of this. But most communities, I think almost all the communities that I'm familiar with, require a garage, even a 2-car garage, and are completely ill-adverse to building a house on a slab. There are lots of reasons for these things. I totally understand them, but communities are saying how desperately they want affordable single-family housing. So we have to really start thinking about how we can bring these things forward in a way that we're not used to, frankly. I will share with you that there's a project in Fitchburg right now that is being discussed, where there is a developer, who is wanting to develop, I think it's maybe up to 100 homes that are all small format, single family homes, that may or may not have garages. It's kind of a big thing because people are uncomfortable with that idea with no garages, but the idea is that they're trying to target all of these homes for less than 300,000.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great.
and so I think there's
creative.
going to be kind of a land banking thing and, but this has never been done. I've never seen it. So it's kind of a really interesting, potential new model. And I just want to share this one anecdote with you. Around the time when I was born in 1965, the median home price to the median income to median home price was 1 to 3, and now it's 1 to 5. Just to kind of give you the steepness of the difference. Obviously wages, we all know this, wages are not keeping up with the soaring housing prices. And then when you talk about zoning for additional supply, I think you guys did most of this, if not all of it, in your new ordinance. By right housing is simply the quickest way to bring forward more housing. If you allow something by right, then it can happen without all of these, you still have to go through the permitting process, of course, but all of these reviews that actually really take up a lot of time. And so by right, missing middle housing is something that is sort of being discussed as a target. Lifting multifamily caps. A lot of the communities in Dane County have multifamily caps. Increasing height limits in designated locations. Updating the definition of family to allow for unrelated individuals to live together. I don't know if you guys did that in your zoning code, but that's a problem in a lot of zoning codes because it doesn't allow unrelated people to live together. And this elderly woman from the village of Oregon was shared with me at a meeting. She said, my friend's rent is going up all the time and we're both single and she can't live with me because it's illegal. And so it's a small thing you don't really think about, but it is something that could potentially, facilitate maybe and make
Abby,
more
I think,
accessible.
Abby, we are allowing that, yeah?
Yeah, our definition of family, I think, is pretty permissive.
Yeah.
I think the only thing on the list that we haven't done is by right housing, because even if a site is already zoned for multifamily, we still have site plan review before the plan commission. So are you saying by right, meaning it's just a matter of pulling a permit and you don't go to any public meeting? Is that?
For units of 10 units or below. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
for 10 or
Right, 10
fewer.
units or
Okay.
And, there could be design standards in place. And so they, that would have to be,
Staff review, but
Right,
it wouldn't go
but-
to a commission.
right. Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, it
Mayor
is.
Kuhn has been facilitating meetings with the development community, just open-ended and asking for feedback. And we got a long lecture yesterday about holding costs and how every commission member and committee member and city staff should be informed about holding costs, because that adds cost to
It
housing.
does, yeah,
of course.
right, yeah. And then ADUs by right, and then I think allow single family lots to be subdivided. And I think you guys did that, right? Yeah.
We do that, and our minimum single family lot used to be 7,200 square feet, which is pretty large,
Right.
and now it's in the high density district, it's 3,000.
Yeah, great.
And they were very creative with their ADU interpretation as well, much more supportive of ADUs. So it was appreciated.
Yeah, yeah. The next thing next component you'll want to include in the Affordable Housing Action Plan is some way to engage residents, really at all income levels. A survey is typically the easiest way to do it, widely distributed in a variety of formats, whether it's paper or electronic, in a variety of languages. Since you just did a housing chapter update, maybe you want to use that community survey. I don't know,
We did it last year.
Yeah, okay, so, this might not need to repeat it. But also a way to sort of, another way to do it, just to make sure that there is some, community input, is small focus groups. If you don't need to do the whole survey again, maybe just some small focus groups, just, confirm what you confirmed before, and, that's just an opportunity. And that the focus groups are also a good way to get to the harder to reach populations, because you can have it at varying times. Folks can't necessarily come at a certain time, or they might not have the money to get down here, or they might have childcare issues. So you could really do a lot with focus groups potentially. I think one of the things that we did with the community housing survey for the regional housing strategy is we asked a lot more broad questions than we typically would in a community housing survey. And I'll just share 2 of them with you here. And this was a really helpful, and we're going to actually be publishing a report. My new colleague, Paige Marshall, is here. She's going to be publishing the community housing survey. It was part of the regional housing strategy, one of the several hundred pages. But we're going to pull that out and actually publish a report so we could actually spend a little more time looking at that and hear what people said. But should all county residents have access to housing? 98% of residents that believe all Dane County residents should have access to housing. Most do not believe that housing is currently accessible. So that was a really important thing for policymakers to hear. And who's responsible for addressing the housing crisis? 82% said local jurisdictions. 59% also indicated the private sector should work to address housing crisis. So that was a really helpful, bit of information to get. And those you don't typically see in a local housing survey. It's really, so anyway, the housing survey does provide an opportunity to kind of expand on what we're typically seeing. As I said before, I did see that equity was an issue. It was something that you wanted to address, particularly in your housing chapter. And so I think it is important to have something explicitly stated in an equity plan, whether you identify the obstacles to information access, include language or reference to equity in your policy and financing and land use program discussions. But it's really important to be intentional as you create this plan, and then include diverse stakeholders in the decision-making processes.
Olivia, can I ask you a maybe a tricky political question? Does it behoove us to think about putting these things in our plan? I know we believe in all of these.
Right.
Is it going to affect any federal funding if we put these words into play?
I don't think you're going to use federal funding to develop your plan, but if you would, maybe that would, but.
I would probably, I'll answer this as a friend, not as the mayor.
Okay.
I would say, if you asked that 2 weeks ago, I would say, go ahead. It's a great idea. After the last week and a half, I would just.
We would word it creatively.
Thank you.
And the county board, this is just an example of the way that they do it. Dane County was the first county in the country to do a racial equity and inclusion analysis of all operations and programs, as you may or may not know. So all of the departments in the county have a racial equity and inclusion plan. And we have regular, meetings and presentations. So one of the things that the county board did is on all of their agendas, on every piece of paper, whether it's a committee meeting, a commission meeting, a meeting of the whole, it says who benefits, who is burdened, who does not have a voice at the table, how can policymakers mitigate unintended consequences. So they're just constantly being reminded of it whenever they're looking at documents. And that's just some small thing that I think is a good example of ways to just kind of keep it in front of mind and be intentional. So. And this is some information that we, found in the regional housing strategy. Obviously, you can see, the racial disparities in home ownership, with whites being 64% of white households being homeowners, and then all the way down to 13% Black and African American being homeowners. And this is also an example of who suffers the most in terms of cost burden. And when you talk about cost burden, typically you're paying more than 30% of your household, your monthly income on housing, This skews, Hispanic and Latino and Black and African American households are the most cost burdened households in Dane County by a significant margin. But maybe it's different here. Every municipality is going to be different. So decision making, obviously, you're going to want to identify a body, a group, whether it's your workforce housing committee, the CDA, the council, who's going to be responsible for overseeing the development and inflation of the Affordable Housing Action Plan. You're going to want to, obviously create or update your charge to reflect that new responsibility. What is their charge? Do they have bonding authority? If so, what are the priorities? So the decision making or this decision body is going to be important to identify. The next things I will share with you is that, you're gonna want to have a sort of section with communication, information, and resources. I heard time and time and time again from so many different stakeholders that we don't have enough information. We don't have access to, we can't find, I don't know where to look for affordable housing rentals. I need emergency assistance. I would love to buy a home. Where do I go? Like down payment, what is there something is like a home buyer training? It's very, homebuyer training is very established in the city of Madison, but around the county, there's a lot less knowledge and understanding and interest, or not interest, but access to this information. So I share with everybody that I think it's really important to have some sort of a communications plan or a way that you're going to communicate, particularly about the plan and provide information and updates, but also engage them around this issue and be as open and and so you can be as open and transparent as possible. A housing webpage is a good idea. You could do emails, you could do a Facebook page. As you know, or maybe not know, I think most of you should be on the monthly housing newsletter that we send out.
Mhm.
So that's something to do. And maybe, I know that there's limited staff, but it is a really important resource and way to engage the community around an issue that is so important. And really, that communication really actually helps capacity building in terms of knowledge and awareness that I think can only benefit you in the long run.
Mhm.
So it's something, that having a communication plan, even if it's a very, one or two things in a limited way to regularly communicate would be helpful. A housing webpage would be very helpful, just with some basic information, whether it's, way forward is on there and various resources, down payment assistance, whether it's, some information about, the, rehab programs or WIDA's homebuyer education programs. It's very helpful. Yeah.
If you're talking about the housing webpage, does the county have a template that municipalities like ours could look at and take that language or refer people to? Because as you're talking, it sounds like it's needed countywide. So if we go and make the page for our residents, but Madison already has it, and then Wanakee, and then Cross Plains is also trying to build it. Is it something that is being done at the county level that we just need to pause and wait for? Or is there just some best practices that we could utilize when we're building our page?
So yes, and to both of those. So the county, probably, I'd say about 2 months, we're going to release we're calling it the All Things Housing website, very extensive information. However, and you're welcome to take as much of that as, absolutely. However, you want it obviously to apply to your community because no one would know that there's Way Forward here or, other resources and even a food pantry or whatever you want to put on your website. So it's important. You absolutely, we can create a template, a very basic template for you. You can see the template. I'm happy to share that with you. It's a little extensive. I don't think you're going to want to, build such a big thing. But you're probably going to want to identify 2 or 3 or 4 stakeholder groups, like, lower income residents. Maybe it's, pathways to home ownership. Maybe it's, builders and developers. But a place where people can know that they can start to think about coming to, and we'll have a lot of links on how to find an apartment, so they can just sort of begin to come and see you as a resource for housing, whether they're low income, whether they're looking to buy a home, whether they need emergency assistance, that kind of thing. So the other aspect of this too is developing a housing coalition. I know that there's one in Madison and there's one in Sun Prairie, but it's a really important interface potentially with the city and for folks to actually hear about and engage with you around developments, to learn, to better understand how the municipal process works. So if there is one, I would encourage, you to interface as much as possible with them, but identify them on your website. Or if there's an email, so people who go to your website know that if they want to, learn about the local housing coalition and what they do, that they can find them. And I think also development notices, other than public notice, that I hear a lot of people talk about at the staff level, where, and this, right? When you have a public hearing with the development, so often we're getting typical people, mostly homeowners, maybe they're older, probably skew white. So how do we actually start to break that down and make public hearings or public access more representational? And that's something that we're talking about a lot. And I think there are other ways to do that besides the public hearing, because a lot of people can't get to the public hearing, don't have the time, the money, they've got kids, whatever. So are there other things that we can do? Can we have just a form that's always on the website? So if someone wants to register support or register, that they can actually submit it, whether it's there or not, at what time, maybe it's there all day, so they don't have to be there at the specific time. So just trying to start to think outside the box, how we can make our public processes or, representative around, development projects, which tend to create a lot of discomfort. And then, you'll want to have housing definitions and then, inventory on, so when you're talking about, your policies that you're going to put forward or the priorities that you have, people kind of understand, or can go to a place where what is missing middle housing? What is modular housing? What is, and when you're doing your housing needs assessment, you can actually, demarcate these types of housing groups, and you can look at these types and really get, clear about what it is that you have and where the gaps are. And then you're also going to want to have sort of an area where, you're listing your housing programs and your committees. What are you actively doing right now? Is there a workforce housing committee? Is there the planning commission? Who, where's all things housing in the city of Middleton? Efficiency navigator. Right. Yeah.
Can I ask, would that be in the plan or is that on the external website
I
that
would
you're
say
thinking?
both, but I think that's, certainly up to you. Yep.
I mean, that's something that we were talking about this week.
Yeah.
And so, but, the one thing we have to think about as a city and as a council, so, sorry, I'm speaking right now, is, a lot of these ideas are wonderful and robust. And I think I just want to put a little bit of caution, because even though these are really great ideas, the difference is that in the 5 years before we were in leadership, we built like 50 single family homes in the city of Middleton. There was a different market demand. The process, it's a little different when you build, an apartment building, the permits, because you're not dealing one house at a time. And now we're bringing on like 800 single family homes the next 5 years.
Wow.
And I do want to point out that Alder Haniro is on our plan commission and our workforce housing, and she champions this as well. Everybody on here champions it. So if it was 5 years ago and we were bringing on 10 homes that year and maybe one building, that's easy to list. We're doing very large volume right now. We're trying to streamline processes as a whole in support of housing. It is a huge demand.
Right.
And we're trying to get the supply out to the customers, to the buyers or the renters, and hear from our developers and builders so that we aren't creating roadblocks without realizing it. And I think that's renewing some interest in to get to building that maybe that was on a pause, which is really good. So things are flying fast. We may want to be listing them all out, and we can do that. It's something Abby and I were talking about yesterday, was just have a list. But at the same time, it's moving so fast that by the time we create a list, 2 of them may be done. So it's one of those things that it's a good idea, but we have a lot in the pipeline right now, and we just have to remember to preserve staff. And I say that because some of our developers, I think that our planning and our engineering departments are the size of Madison.
Yeah.
And so they're like, so can you just deploy, this to this person, and then I can just reach out to the one, and that one person's in charge of one project. And I think Abby's team is 4. So it's not Madison. And I just don't want to overwhelm staff. So just trying to make sure, yeah, you have a thought.
I just, while we're on the subject of units, I was going to wait until the end of your presentation, Olivia, but I want to correct what I said earlier when you had the slide up about 318 units per year.
Mhm.
In 2024, we actually did exceed that target in total number of units. I was thinking back to 2023 when we had a low number, we only had 67 housing units.
Mhm.
But in 2024, we had 443 housing units because Greenway mixed use, it's in Greenway Station. It's a large multifamily
Mhm.
development with 243 units that they got their permit 2024. So I just wanted to correct that.
Great, great. Yeah, and these, what I'm sharing with you is really, you're going to want to streamline that and sort of, what is it called? Just refine it to what your needs are or
Yeah.
what best suits
Right.
you. These are just sort of
Right.
ideas and guidelines that I'm
Yeah.
sharing. So, yeah. But I am happy to share a template, as we're developing it. The one we're using, I think is, it's probably a little too extensive, but, and when we do go live, feel free to grab information that, you feel is suitable for your website.
I appreciate that. I think that will really help staff and our customers, the residents who are
Yeah.
trying to find those resources, because it can be overwhelming. And I appreciate that the county has already been thinking about that
Yeah.
and is moving forward with that. So
And then
thank
for
you.
them to see you as the resource, who you are, you know what's on the ground, what's happening locally, who the players are, the organizations, then there's that you're building that relationship and that capacity. So that's great. The thing I'll end on or start to kind of wind down here is that one of the things that we did with the regional housing strategy as a way to bring forward our priorities, strategies, and action items was we started with identifying core values that the Housing Advisory Committee wanted. This is a way to develop a sort of shared sense of values, a shared sense of understanding, a shared sense of something that we could identify they could identify positively. So these are the core values that the Regional Housing Strategy Advisory Committee identified. And then we also use these to you can only have so many priorities, you can't have like 50 priorities. And so the idea is that these core values run through all of the strategies and action items, even though they're not explicitly stated. So, but this sort of is a way to ground, and it really ground the work and develop the framework for the priority strategies and action items. And yeah, like things like sustainable development. We can't talk about sustainable development every time we talk about a policy, but knowing that all these things underpin all the things that we're doing was a way to imbue them with the values. And I think people just really have found it to be useful. And I hear people talk about it, and I know I talk about it. So this was just something that, you might want to consider, depending on how much of your housing chapter you move forward or how much you want to kind of redo for your action plan. And then, so this was we used that to identify the top 5 housing priorities. They're almost identical, I think, with Middleton. I think you've identified all these, maybe 3. I think the regional housing strategy identifies that very strongly. I think you do a little bit, but not as explicitly, I think. But for the most part, both your housing chapter and the regional strategy are very aligned. And this was the vision statement they created. RHS envisions an equitable and environmentally sustainable future where all residents have access to quality and affordable housing and connected neighborhoods. I don't remember what your vision statement is, or if you had a vision statement for the housing chapter. But I feel like that is very similar to what you're putting forward, either, implicitly or explicitly in that housing chapter. So I saw that similarity. I mean, this is just the components that I've just reviewed. And then, so what we did, we developed 5 priorities. I think it was 25 strategies and 100 action items. In order to create some order around that, it was put into what we call the implementation matrix. And you could see that there's the priority is identified, the strategy there in this one, expand or create affordable housing funds, and then there are action steps and then the implementation partners. So it made it very clear as to, how the actions related to the priority, and then who would be the lead and potentially support partners. So when you have a group this big in a county, it was very helpful to have this, organizing matrix. And then at the bottom of the matrix, which it doesn't show, we identify like 3 or 4 metrics that we're going to track every year. We're about to finalize the annual housing progress report, and then we're gonna send it out to you guys, local governments in the probably by the next 2 or 3 weeks to pilot it, and then we'll send it out and then do our annual reporting probably sometime this late spring. But so we're using this sort of as our guidance, and then the metrics, which, we only have a few metrics for each step, otherwise it would be an encyclopedia. But we just kind of want to figure out a way to gauge progress, and so that folks can see what each other's doing. That was a really important part of the regional housing strategy. People want to know what everyone else is doing and learn from them, and sort of cross-reference their own work. And so we did that with each of the priorities, the 5 priorities. And then, here's one that has metrics. That was metrics for the priority number 3, housing resource and protection for most vulnerable. Able to preserve housing. Yeah. And, playing a little game, myth or fact. Population growth is a primary driver in demand for all new housing in Dane County. Myth or fact? Myth? Fact? Fact? Job creation. Job creation is the primary driver. But it far exceeds population growth in Dane County. Okay, here's another one. Nothing to do with housing. How many people play Wordle every day across the world? Oh, you're a librarian. Does anybody know how many people play Wordle every day? Do you know what Wordle is? Okay, you can tell.
It's gonna be a lot.
It's a game, the New York Times online, that allows you to choose, 5-letter words 6 times. So, you got 6 chances to guess a 5-letter word.
And how many people play it every day?
Oh, million.
3 million people. Anyway, we digress. So considerations, the final thing is, there's a lot to think about, but your housing needs assessment will really help you inform policy and program development or changes or updates or things that you want to do when you really get that super, sort of granular, detailed look at your housing in Middleton. Preserving it at our existing housing stock, especially NOAA and single family and multifamily, is critical. As you probably know, most of our affordable housing already exists. It's housing that's built before 2000. Some say before 1990, but because of our prices, it's before 2000. So that is, single family and multifamily is just, to replace that now, as we know, is so expensive. So that is a big priority. We do need more affordable housing, without a doubt. We really do. And then light tech, these multifamily developments that I told you about, these mixed income multifamilies, is really important, but it's not the only answer. And I think in some ways, and I'm inviting us to think about this together out loud, we need to identify ways to bring forward more permanent affordable housing that's owned by nonprofits, that doesn't have the all of the strings and the development costs and everything that is attached to these light tech projects. Light tech projects are very expensive, and their LURA, their land use restrictions, are only good for 30 years. And in 30 years, those developments will phase out and could potentially become market rate. We have a lot of them in the pipeline. I'm not going to be around in 30 years from now, but people who, we've been developing a lot of them. What's going to happen when all of these developments that will certainly need upgrades no longer have those land use restrictions and go to the market? We've seen that in the last 5 years. I don't know if you've read the paper, but there's some examples of this where whole apartment buildings are being emptied out of people who thought they were going to live out their old age in these affordable housing developments, and they can't because the land use restriction is no longer the affordability requirement is no longer there. So we all need to think about this. I know the county's thinking about it, but how do we make sure that we capture that? Maybe we build in first right of refusal. I don't know, but it's a very significant issue. And I do think that nonprofits certainly have a lot less paperwork and red tape potentially that can own and manage and maintain affordable housing. In a way that the light tech projects can't. Not to say that we shouldn't be building light tech. We absolutely should. But I just think we need to be starting to think about more about permanent affordable housing.
Would city-owned properties count in a situation like that?
City-owned properties, you guys have.
Like if we started buying up properties that we could identify as places we wanted to have affordable housing.
Yeah,
we would
you could be
actually-
owners of affordable housing. You could, yeah,
Correct.
sure. City of Madison owns a lot of affordable.
And then we
housing.
could
It could be
make
permanent.
sure that that doesn't happen.
Right. And the CDA could, yeah, the CDA would be the owner.
Okay, cool.
So, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Little interests and stuff.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for coming.
Yes.
Is there anyone else who has any thoughts or questions for Olivia?
Yes. One of the things that you have mentioned, I totally agree with. Being from New York City, my brother's a real estate broker in New York City. And he said that's what they're suffering in New York City. A lot of the developers are declaring bankruptcy because their buildings are empty because of what's happening up there. So like, he says it's horrible, what's going on up there. Another thing that I want to ask, the market rate that you spoke about, where do those numbers come from? Who determines that?
The market
Rate value. How do we get those?
how those
mar-
rents are valued?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the developer. That's the developer.
that's the developer itself.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and far as, you was talking about developers coming in, buying up single property and
Renting them out.
renting.
Right.
So
that may
from
have-
New York to Georgia, and when I got to Wisconsin, I didn't hear it here. I was wondering, do the developers consider the rent to own option?
Do developers consider rent to own option? I think that is an option, but I don't know that much about it. Mayor?
Yeah, we've talked to a developer who's doing it in Milwaukee right now, and we've asked for him to consider pitching to Middleton if there are some opportunities, and he tends to focus on duplex. So they are the missing middle. And I think he's having a tour with our planning director next week. I've got that resource out of a Milwaukee network.
That's good, that's
Are you talking about
good.
the Gorman project in Milwaukee?
It's not Gorman.
Oh, it's not Gorman.
Oh, I can't remember
Wow.
the name of the developer, but they
Okay.
are using WIDA funding.
Okay.
Yes.
So it'll be interesting to learn about.
Yeah. The
But
only
he
one I
did-
know about is Gorman, and, you know, in Milwaukee, the properties that you got, like, they got like, you know, a lot for $25,000. So it was just like, I was like, okay,
So this person's using, I think he said federal WIDA when we met with him.
wow.
So
I mean-
he's looking at state as well to sort of work
Yeah.
through a multi-prong approach so that because I did warn him that Dane County prices are expensive, although Milwaukee is as well. But I'm glad you're asking that question because the rent to own, I think, is an opportunity that we haven't considered in a long time.
It's a great opportunity. It worked well, especially when you talk about the numbers with the 13% with the Latino and African American community. It worked well in New York because people were willing to invest in getting a property that they knew that down the line they had opportunity for ownership. So I'm going in, I'm renting, I know I'm getting ready to own it, you know, so it worked out very well. It also worked out very well in the community because I find when people have investment in their ownership, they treat their community, their neighborhood and everything different comparing to renting. So it
Oh,
worked out
absolutely.
very well. The rent to own
Right.
was, I mean, it was awesome.
Yeah.
Even when you talk about the nonprofit, there's can't remember his first name. His name is Dr. Allen. He was a church that they were in Queens. They were in the dilapidated, impoverished community, and he did that. He's got the church together to buy up the community, and then what they did is some of the resources they did. They taught credit repair, financial classes, and everything else, getting people into ownership. And now there's like a 20-block radius. The church sits on. There's a senior home. There's about 5 affordable houses. There's houses all around it. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And because he started that vision, nonprofit stepped in and said, hey, let's take this and let's show people that they can be homeowners.
Yeah.
And they started the rent to own thing.
There's some
They
amazing
started-
nonprofit
Yes,
models all around the
yes,
country. and-
awesome nonprofit
Yeah.
projects.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I mean, bringing the nonprofit leaders in is a great investment. It's a
Yeah.
great investment, great conversation
Yeah.
to definitely have, especially when there are people out there that are hard workers, be it Latino, African American, or whatever, that want home ownership, but they feel like they can't afford it.
Right.
You know, I remember we just was with the League of Municipalities session, and I went to the housing session, And it kind of blew my mind when the guy was saying, he said, really, when you look at the numbers, to actually really own a house, he said, yeah, you need about $90,000 down. I was like, what? Who got that? Who has 90,000 to put down right now for home ownership? No, we got to come up with a better plan.
Yeah.
And if we could come up with a better plan and resource to get people into home ownership, I think there's a lot of people out there that want to go into home ownership.
Yeah. And I'm glad you actually just mentioned that, because I will share with you that that was one of the things, the priorities for the regional housing strategy. We're leaving hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table for down payment assistance around the county because people don't know about it. And yeah, and so that is really on us, all of us, I guess, but really to get that information out there, because there's just, you know, the city, the county, Dane County Home Buyers Roundtable, there's just a lot of money and resources out there. And in Dane County, you can qualify for, I think, up to $55,000 of down payment assistance. So, and you know,
Can we have a link to that information
Absolutely.
like today? Because I know there's people out there looking.
absolutely.
That
yeah,
can go
sure.
on our housing page.
Yeah.
There you go. I appreciate that. And I didn't mean to laugh when you talked about the 9,000. I remember that first time trying. I'm like, I never have more than $500 in the bank.
Yeah.
Who
So
has
that's
like
what I'm
10 to
saying.
20?
And I like providing a pathway to home ownership.
Right.
And a part of that is, as the mayor mentioned, information, education, because people don't know. They just don't know.
Right.
And there's a lot of people
Right.
in the work field. When I traveled throughout Wisconsin, I was like, hey, I wish I could own a house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but they just don't know. They don't know the resources. They don't know how to tap into it. And when you go to a meeting, like even myself, hardworking individual, I'm sitting there like, okay, home ownership is out the picture for me. $90,000.
Yeah.
I'm getting $90,000. But
Yeah.
then I found out by doing my research that there are a lot of resources out there
Right.
that you can get what you need to get to home ownership.
Yeah. And they need to be centrally located.
Yes.
We
Yes.
say really
There's so
do.
many different ones all over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I just want to end by saying thank you. You guys have been great partners, especially during the regional housing strategy, your leadership, the council's leadership. This is such a hard nut to crack, and it really does take all of us working together. So it's really great to have you as partners, and thank you guys so much. So.
Olivia, I
Yeah,
do
sure.
have a couple of questions. Is there still time?
Yeah, of course.
So first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. It's super helpful, especially to have the best practices for the Affordable Housing Action Plan. Question for you, how much of the data and maybe Abby and Daphne can chime in, how much of the data for the housing needs assessment are things that we already have to collect for the state required housing affordability report?
Well, Abby can answer that, but I think you have a lot of the data that you will need for, you know, but I'm not saying that you have all of it, but I think you do probably have a lot of data since it's pretty recent because your comp plan chapter was just
Yeah.
22, 23.
23, but I
Right.
think a lot of the data in the fee report is specific to like how much the city is charging for impact fees,
Right.
park fees, permitting fees, et cetera. We do have quite a bit of housing data that we get through the census and the American Community Survey that Daphne downloads every year and kind of creates data tables and charts with. So, I mean, we can look into it. I do think that some of the things that you listed on the screen are a bit more specific than what we have.
Okay.
It's probably about 50% we have in-house and would be pretty easy to collect. And then the other half would take some additional work.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Olivia, you talked about community engagement, and, you know, it's true that when there is a development proposed, the people who come out to hearings are opposed to it. And typically they live right next to it, which by definition is NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And we often hear, I'm not opposed to development, just not here.
Right.
That is not right for right here. It
Right.
should be somewhere else.
Mhm.
So how does the county have any resources to help communities get past this? Because when we have community engagement, it's typically going to be the people who have more flexibility with their time. And that's people like me who are retired and can attend meetings and not have to take kids to, you know, soccer and what have you.
Right.
So how does the county?
So there are two things that can be done. As I said earlier, there's something that can be done locally where when you have developments, And if there's a housing coalition to be, directly working with them, have a Facebook page when you have developments coming up, that it's not just a notice in the paper. It's you want to have broader engagement. It's really important to get that information out. And to have people have the opportunity not to come in, but to actually weigh in, either electronically at different times, because people can't necessarily come. So we have to, as local, staff, we have to figure out ways that we can make it more accessible. And certainly we can do it in other languages too, especially if it's an online form. But we have to start educating not only ourselves, but particularly ourselves that when we're making development decisions, development decisions impacts the whole community. It's not just this block. This affects housing prices going into the future. This affects who can work and live here going into the future. So it's really a community-wide decision that needs to be made. And so I am starting to work on talking points. I will share with you one of the things that came out of the regional housing strategy, which I'm very excited about. I'm about to sign a contract with a company called 6 a.m. Marketing. And they are going to develop one of the things that, this is a big thing in that regional housing strategy. So we're going to be developing a 3 to 5 year housing outreach and marketing campaign to address the housing crisis. And the whole focus is educating residents about what the housing crisis is, how it got here, what are some of the issues, how can we solve it, what are the things that you can do, and what would be solved by addressing the housing crisis. And it's they're marketing experts, so they're going to come back with a plan. Literally about to sign the contract in about 3 or 4 months. I will probably reach out to local governments to get their input about things, ways that we could potentially communicate with residents, whether it's podcasts or flyers or radio ads or town halls. I don't know. They're the experts. They're going to let us know. And but we're going to really engage all of you guys in that conversation about what and how do we need to communicate with residents and stakeholders, not just residents, but our employers, our church leaders or whoever. So we can make it a campaign that's really can touch on as many on many different levels and pull as many different levers as possible. So that's another thing that we're going to do. But you're not alone.
I'm really glad to hear that you're doing that, because I think that's a really good role that the county can play. And then the cities can each kind of amplify that message through our own channels.
Yeah.
Several months ago, we had a meeting with some of our staff team, including our communications manager, Brent, along with Dane County staff, Casey Becker and her department. And we were working on trying to figure out how we can do a better job, like communicating the need to our residents, because we do have a lot of misinformation that comes up, like all the apartments are empty. Why would you build any more? There's just so many misconceptions that it's like trying to play whack-a-mole to address every single misstatement that's made during a meeting. And I really feel like it needs a bigger picture communication strategy.
Yeah.
So I think that will be really helpful.
Yeah, we're going to try and debunk a lot of the myths out there, like developers are driving all the growth. No, it's the employers.
Well, and I appreciate Abby adding to this to explain what we've been doing here. I think it still needs to be understood that it's sometimes necessary and okay to say no when people just dig in and continue to oppose a development. Like, we can try to reach out to the people who are not highly engaged in the housing issue. But there's a reason why they're not highly engaged in the housing issue. It's because nothing's being built in their backyard and they're not looking actively for housing for themselves or family members.
Exactly.
And so when you feel like this is just a psychological thing. When you feel like you are threatened by something, you are much more motivated than, to stop something being taken away from you than you are to acquire something. So I feel like it needs to be understood that as council members or members of commissions and committees, it is sometimes okay, and necessary to say, I'm sorry, we hear your concerns, we understand your concerns, and yet the bigger picture for the city is we need housing, and this housing is not going to materially harm you.
Yeah.
So
And I think you bring up a good point, because the whole idea of NIMBYism, and I don't even like to use that term, creates an us and them. And, you know, I think it's gonna be, really important to get down to the psychology of it, because we actually do have, you know, people who want housing and don't want housing. We actually do have a lot of shared values and beliefs, and, you know, everyone wants, you know, their, maybe their elder parents to be able to afford to move here or to have housing, or they want their kids to be able to live here, or you want to be able to, you know, so I think there's a lot of shared values, and, but it's so often, you know, us against them. And so it's a really bad dynamic to get into, because people are generally, people don't like change. Who likes change? I mean, it's understandable. I totally understand when people are like, no, I don't want that, because it means change, and change is uncomfortable. And if you don't understand what the change means and why, then it's going to be a lot harder. So I think that hopefully the campaign will really get to some of those more subtle conversations. Mayor?
I appreciate that overview and support. And I appreciate Alder Hanairo's sharing to start that conversation. And I want to sort of step back a little bit to the housing survey that we did here. I will say that we didn't do a normal housing survey. We asked some particularly interesting questions. Probably because we just love policy. And so one of the things that we learned was that 8% of homeowners felt their house was too big, and 6% of, no, let me take that back. 6%. Yeah, I think it was that. And then 6% was too small and they were trying to get into a bigger house. So one of the things that we were always working on Plan Commission was trying to get the supply, working with developers. And part of our housing survey found that actually we had some of the answers within the housing stock. It's just that you can't say, okay, Sally and Jane, you want the opposite, go ahead and swap. And by the way, change the money amount, that's a differential. And some of our, thanks for laughing, empty nesters, if they're like my parents, they didn't just move out on a Tuesday like I used to do when I moved 10 times in 12 years. They have 50 years of stuff. And so one of the outcomes we saw over that course of that year is one of the large apartments that really did have a lot of neighbors that were concerned. I think you might remember that one. And it turns out that half of the building were local community members that moved into it. And what I heard was that a lot of them were slowly cleaning out their house to put it on the market in the spring. But they had that ability. Now, granted, that doesn't help our folks who are trying to get from renting to owning.
Yeah.
But it didn't force them to move fast. It gave them time. The sale of the house then allowed them to have a little wiggle room in these times of inflation increasing and taxes. Like a lot of our widows struggle with taxes. But also they were no longer then cleaning a 5-bedroom house, you know, taking care of a driveway when it snows for 6 cars. They were moving into an apartment.
Yeah.
And then they could take time to buy that smaller house because it went on the market. And then at the same time, there's a lot of development in Alder Hanairo's district for single family homes. And she's championing those. And so a lot of them are the locals who are moving either from those apartments that they moved into, and now they're finding the smaller ones, or other families who are just moving to a smaller one, and they have that capability because now there's also houses.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that she's reminding us to be reflective to the whole. And I appreciate you that you gave that overarching principles. So, but if you need an example, you could probably summarize that.
Yes, definitely.
But it was an
Definitely.
interesting
Yeah.
mix match of the housing stock, and they just needed a chance to swap.
I'll be sure to reach out to Middleton and my colleagues over here when we get the marketing and outreach study getting underway. Yeah.
Alder Jackson, I'll let you have one last comment, and then I think we're gonna let Olivia get on with her weekend.
I just want to say I commend Abby and them about what she mentioned with Brett and them getting, because I think the biggest issue is the information, education, and communication of what's going on. I myself was guilty of what workforce housing was. And I think people don't understand that. And I think it was with the man, a few people had a conversation, and it came up, workforce housing is the Middleton police officer or the primary teacher.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the drug dealer or the poor person that lives down the block. And that's what I think people don't understand. When they say, we don't want this in our community, no, let us explain to you what workforce housing is. Workforce housing is the nurse at UW.
Yeah.
These are people, their incomes are $58,000-$60,000 a year.
Yeah.
So I think the information and communication to the constituents is what needs to be
Yeah.
the biggest thing we go after, to get out to them so they know, no, these are, because they have this thing, you're letting these people in. Yeah, these people are the teachers that are teaching your kids at Cromrie.
Right.
These people are the Middleton police officer driving down the street who can't afford the $250,000 house. So they need the mill apartments. They need those workforce housing, and that's what you need to understand. So I think I commend Abby and support her and Brett and them on getting that communication, that education, and that information out there to our community.
Yeah, and then we start that campaign and we actually get the images of these people, because everyone
Yeah.
says these people and no one actually has that image. What does that mean? And how does it relate to me? You know, so I think that's really going to be helpful, but thank you.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm going to call a 10-minute recess so we can get rid of lunch and stretch our legs. And I'm setting my timer. I'm going to call it back in 10 minutes. Thanks for coming back from recess. Continuing on with our discussion items. Calling the meeting to order again. Meeting back in order. Next, we would like to go to our discussion item. Discussion and consideration of potential Middleton housing priorities. This is where we're gonna have a discussion about if we want to have a housing plan. And I want to talk about geographic areas that we should focus on. And this is where I'm going to put some onus on all the elders to think about your district and help identify areas that we could prioritize. So I've asked the city administrator to put together a zoning map for each of your districts, which you have in front of you. So based on what we heard from Olivia Perry today, some really cool ideas, some very creative ideas. What are some things that you're thinking about in your district that could be done? I think I'm going to ask Alder Heniro to start this discussion because she just attended a really nice conference on it. I'd love that if you would.
Okay, well, I'll begin, and I'm also the chair of the Workforce Housing Committee. So my committee has been working a lot on this over the past year, actually leading up to the discussion we'll have later about the TID extension. Yes, I'm jumping ahead a little bit to the recommendations, but the Workforce Housing Committee will be recommending an approach that first of all, relies on an extension of our TID so that we can take that final increment and use that for affordable housing. Based on various workshops and things I've attended, one of the first things that the committee is going to be recommending is that we buy. You know, that's, if you don't have land, you can't develop much in the way of housing. So the recommendation will be to have a program that focuses on buying, building, refurbishing, and financing and educating. So the buy is obvious. We need to buy land as it becomes available and maybe target some specific locations, which I hope everyone's checking out your maps to see. Build could be the city is the owner and landlord, or something different, like we issue an RFP for someone like the Madison Area Development Corporation to come in and build an affordable housing development for us. Refurbish is something like what we're doing with the Energy Navigator project. That's specifically for energy efficiency improvements, but other communities are using their affordable housing funds to pay for things like replacing a roof or even, you know, upgrading a gas furnace to a new energy efficient model, not necessarily electric. Financing, we have options for things like a down payment assistance, which I confess I'm a little skeptical of, because unless it's a grant, it's still money you have to pay back. So is that really making it that much more affordable? To me, it's just taking on that much more debt. But that's something that we can consider. And for that, for the financing option, we'd probably need to partner with a bank or credit union, because I think that would be very complicated for the city to do on its own. And then educating. And that could be, that includes both having a website. Sun Prairie has a really good housing website where people can go to find out about affordable housing rentals that are available, and workshops like how to become a homeowner. So it's educating our current and prospective residents, but it's also beginning sooner rather than later to educate our community about what the housing crisis is, what factors into higher rents and higher home prices than people can afford. Who are the people that, who are our neighbors that we're trying to accommodate with this, things like that. So those are all the things that we're planning to do or hoping to do with the council's approval. Olivia may not have mentioned this in her presentation, but that 318 housing units per year figure, that includes both rental and owner occupied. And the Workforce Housing Committee is also emphasizing affordable living, not just affordable housing. So affordable living could mean concentrating development along our transit corridors so that people don't have to have a car to get around the area to get to their jobs, and also building near resources like a grocery store. So people, again, don't have to rely on an expensive car, basically. All cars are expensive when you factor in gas and insurance and parking. So that's another thing that we're going to be emphasizing. So I hope the council will be in agreement that we need to have a housing program, and that we should use the TID extension to fund it initially. There are ways to add to that fund. And I hope my colleagues on council will be looking at their own districts to see where can you incorporate new housing into your district. The mayor mentioned District 6. We have, it'll be now with Pheasant Crossing, which is the Ziegler property, with that on the table, I'm estimating around 2,000 units of housing just in these three developments. Red Tail Ridge, which is already occupied, they're still building, but there are people already living there. Bell Farm, which has roads, but I don't think they've broken.
Is there
have
one
two.
house?
Yeah.
I
Okay,
saw
I
it
haven't-
yesterday.
I haven't driven past there, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
And then Pheasant Crossing will be nothing but single family homes. The other two will have apartments as well. But, you know, and on top of that, we had the mill apartments go in on Century Avenue in District 6. So we're cranking along and contributing, and, you know, we did annex a bunch of property spilling onto farmland for these developments, but it is what it is. Anyway, I hope our contribution to meeting that 318 units per year will be matched in other districts. And
Yeah. Let's think about our districts for a minute and think about whether or not we use this TID extension, some of the money. Is there a house that's been sitting empty in your district? Could that be something that we would want to own as a city and have it be an affordable rental? Are there empty lots? And there are very few empty lots in the city, I know.
I just want to clarify on the rental of a house. If it's a house, is a single family house in a neighborhood, can you long-term rental that if it's not rent to own? Because I know there was issues about the people buying up all these houses and then renting them out like corporations, but I thought something in a single family district, there was a restriction on how long you can rent.
No.
There's
No.
actually restrictions on what we can do to restrict rentals of housing.
You know, Mike Davis back in the day told me that when he came to Middleton back in the 80s, it was something like almost half of Middleton is rentals, and it's still about 40%.
Rentals, I think we're starting to get more towards like 60% rentals.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a ton of homes that are just rented out. Yeah. No, I can think in my district, there's a home that's been sitting empty for years. And I think there's like a son who goes once a month and puts salt on the sidewalk, and that's about it. And it's a one-story home. It could be perfect for a retired couple. It could be perfect for a new family. Stuff like that. I want us to be identifying
Yeah, there's a number of them.
and bring that, I don't know, I guess bring it to meetings so that we can focus on them. I don't know when we would have money to start getting this creative, but you know, yeah, I like it. Randall, and then,
And I'll just
Dave.
talk a little bit about my district, and this is true of Dave's and Lisa's districts too, is that we're kind of on the northern edge of the city.
Mhm.
Anything in District 8 would be out Highway Q. I mean, if we're gonna do something new, which means we need to build other things too. A grocery store I've been hoping for out in my neighborhood, somewhere nearby. But in terms of being close to transit, buses don't go out that far. And again, they won't until there's a bigger population. And tell you the truth, I don't know exactly how that works to get bus service out that way. So yeah, there's some land out in my district, but yeah, it's a problem of everybody. Most people would end up driving into town,
yeah,
driving to work, or so it's not just housing, but it's everything else that
right.
would have
It's
to go
always a
along
big
with it.
picture, yeah.
Yeah, at least on the northern side of the city.
Mhm. And I don't know how often we negotiate with Madison Metro and how often, I mean, I know we negotiate the price, I think on a yearly basis, but I don't know how often they redo their routes.
Yeah, well, and obviously they just redid all of their
Yeah.
routes
Yeah.
and we had the one bus that goes into our District 7 and 8.
Yep.
Mhm.
We had to encourage them to do more frequent stops there. They were going to cut it back, and Mark Opitz actually negotiated
Yeah.
with them to make sure that we had regular service out there. So
Yeah, it's not the easiest topic, is that? Dave, and then,
Yeah, so in my district, there's a bank building that's been abandoned for a long time. And they've been parking an ambulance in the
fire truck.
fire truck?
Yeah.
Yeah, space, in that space where there used to be the ATMs and stuff. And that's probably institutional, looking at the map. It's at the intersection of Century and Q. I don't know, something fourplex or something could potentially go there, but, or another bank. We don't need banks, do we?
kind of banks, no.
But yeah, the rest of the district in that whole area, it's all single family homes or rented, single family duplexes. I walk that area regularly all the way down, to the intersection of Allen Boulevard. And of course, the other side of it's just landlocked by the Conservancy. So in terms of affordability, there are some large apartment complexes along Century Avenue, and also several of the homes along Century Avenue are currently rented.
Mhm.
So, probably the really opportunity for District 7 is to just keep the public transportation accessible to that point, and that really pretty much ends where the Quick Trip is. There. Q and
Right.
so that's it. The rest of it is and of course, we already know that there's going to be a redevelopment. That's not my district. Oh, sorry, that's Todd's district, but that's going to be at intersection of Allen and Century as well. The apartment development.
Middleton Shores.
Got it. Okay. Let me ask a dumb question before I head to Alder Schaefer. Is there a possibility with any of this TID money that we're going to fall into? What are the possibilities of us ever considering having our own transit system within the city? To help at least get people to the edge of Madison to then continue on with Madison Metro.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that would require budgetary authority from the council. We did have a group that met for a while the internal circulator committee that looked into that initially, but I think what they determined is that they thought that the service that would be provided under the new metro routes would be an improvement, and they wanted to wait and see what happened with the new routes before they would bring anything forward. So it may at some point make sense to get that group back together and get an update on their thoughts. I will say that the problem that Alder Crow was identifying, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, because the model that we went to with Metro Transit, we went away from what was it called before, where we went away from the model where we were trying to pick up all parts of the community, and we went to a model that's focused on where there would be high ridership levels. And so if you don't have the population density, then you're not going to be able to support transit in that part of the city. And so that's really why it is important that we're focusing housing on areas that are well served. Not only is it maximizing the value that we're getting through that contract with Madison Metro, but it's also supporting the transit system itself by providing them with more riders that are close by to use it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Alder Schaefer.
Yeah, it's something Alder and I said that intrigued me, you know, this idea of grocery stores. It's one of the things I heard. I have a lot of apartment constituency out on the far west side of my district. And they have no way, there's not really bus service, there's not really a grocery store, said even a little community, something kind of a grocery store. You know, they're very clear that they want that to be like a #1 priority. So this idea of using some of this money, not just to simply buy a house or buy, but maybe even to help lease or give some developers, say, here's a storefront, and somehow we'll subsidize you if you put a small grocery store in there or something. You know, even thinking, you know, in my district, we're pretty packed up except for the Verns location, but I thought, you know, even Verns, that'd be a great place for little grocery stores. But so that's what I'm hearing loud and clear. So I would hope that we think beyond simply the buying rental properties as a way to look at some of the use of this fund.
In the theme of affordable living, as Alder Hanairo said, there's an empty lot, and I think it's your district. Are you at the corner of Parmenter and University? Or is that me?
That tiny little thing where it used to be a
Uh-huh.
trip or something.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's a spot. It's very narrow.
I keep dreaming about that being a charging station.
Yeah.
I know there's some backstory on the ownership of that, but
Make me want to really just start driving around every street and corner and see what's really there, because there's lots of little pockets of stuff.
right, and that's what I'm charging you to do.
Yeah. I got a map.
I'm having a meeting next week with some folks who own a building on University Avenue. You might know about this meeting.
Is it Robin Coth?
Yeah. And I don't know what the project is, but I'm hoping that it's something we can work with.
Yeah, he's interested in building apartments at his property, which is near University and Branch.
Yep.
Just west of Walgreens.
Yep. Right. Alder Jackson.
Piggybacking off of what Alder Schaefer said and Alder Crow, one of the concerns I hear from my constituents is like, we only got 2 supermarkets for Middleton, and that's Metro and Willie Street Co-op. You know, so a lot of people are saying you're putting up buildings, but we got to go from one side of town to the other side of town just to go shopping. So that's one of my concerns. Another thing is, does the property have to be houses like right there on Lisa Lane and Parmenter? That restaurant needs to go. There's a nice.
Oh,
property
yeah,
right there.
the old
There's a
Fitzgerald.
nice property right there. And I don't know what happened with the Bruce project, but I would love to see some houses on Parmenter come up over there, but definitely the old Fitzgerald. And I've had several people, I even had a Middleton police who was parked there one day. He said, why don't y'all tear this down and put a building right here? Why don't y'all just take it over?
But if the Bruce Company thing goes through, at least it's when I was on plan commission, I mean, that's would add 800 or 900 units. And I don't know that they've built anything, have they?
They're still working on it.
They're still working on it, yeah. So that's the next 5 years, that's gonna really fill in massively.
And then not even only with the restaurant, if you go a little further down, there's a car dealership, but there's an empty, I don't know if they was doing detailing, classic car, there's a lot of space right there.
Well, the detailing shop is going to become Parkland as part of the one just north of the Pheasant Branch. That building, they have a lease that goes for another 3 or 4 years, but the deal with part of Bruce Company thing was to get
The
at least
building that's
3
connected
acres
to the
of
car
parks.
dealership?
No, you're
This-
talking
this
about.
is something-
No, the other
you're talking
side
about
of,
two different.
yeah.
With the car coloring thing.
Auto color.
Yeah.
We own that.
Well, there's a building right next to the car dealership. The car dealership that took over where the shooting was, down at the car dealership there, we got Madison something car dealership, but there's another huge building there with a bunch of junk cars just parked in there. There's a lot of empty buildings and property right there between Donna and Lisa Lane.
We can talk all day about what we want to do with it, but some people own those things, and the matter of talking them into selling is another idea. You know what I mean? And, I loved the property that used to be Rusty's Bar on University Avenue, and it would have been an amazing apartment. My dream was to have a restaurant on the roof where you could see the lake, and it's now an auto body parts store because I didn't own that. Alder Schneider, did you have something to say?
I was just going to ask some specific questions of the staff regarding different restrictions and also trying to figure out why in Alder Lorman's district, there's some property zoned institutional, which I think is government related, but it doesn't look like it's institutional. So I just had clarifying questions. So in my district, on the corner of Century and well, actually it's Park at that place, there are some parcels owned by MG&E, but they're zoned single family, single residence, low density and TRD. And I'm wondering, is there a restriction on that land being developed because it's so close to the electrical substation there?
We would have to look into that. I'm not sure if there are setback requirements.
Yeah, because I know that the one that you're talking about, the big blue triangle, that is,
That is, right.
I think we might have like a bus stop there. And then the ones right just to the east of it, those are zoned single family, but I'm not sure if those have a specific restriction on like height or something that prevents them from being built. Yeah, but I think that those are owned by
MG&E,
Yeah.
right. But I'm thinking that might be an opportunity to put some townhouses or condos along. It wouldn't be the greatest view to the east, but it'd be right there by a bus stop, so.
Yeah, that's.
Hey, what possibilities does a zero lot line idea offer us if we could turn some rentals into home-owned duplexes or something?
We enacted a zero lot line ordinance for what you're asking about for townhomes, probably in 2010. So we've had one in place for a while, and it was intended to help existing duplex owners be able to subdivide their properties and have them available for individual sale. It usually comes along with some additional building code requirements for a firewall. And then also, there has to be a shared maintenance agreement. There are some other factors, but we made that possible, and we have probably had, I would say maybe 6 duplexes in town that have taken advantage of that and split it so that each can be owned separately. But then also in the new code, we allow that by right. And the Red Tail Ridge neighborhood does have some zero lot line townhomes. So those are all individually owned units, but they're in a row.
Thinking out loud about one of our agenda items coming up. I wonder if we do decide on the resolution and we to close out the TID early and have this money for affordable housing upgrades. I wonder if like the firewall situation would be one of those projects that would fall under that idea. So that we have so much rental that turning things into condos or, not rentals, to give people the opportunity to own a home in Middleton. It's so rare. Okay, I love this. We're starting to get the ideas. We're starting to think about our districts. Today we're not voting on anything, but, you feeling like we should talk about, oh, I wanted to ask if we decide, yeah, we need a housing plan. And then Abby and Daphne just faint over because they never get to go home and eat. Is the money from the TID available to hire more staff for planning? Anyone? Bill, are you authority on that?
It is.
The additional funds from the Affordable Housing Extension need to be used for affordable housing. So I think if it were used for staff, it would need to be directly tied to support for affordable housing. I think the other caution is that it's not necessarily an ongoing funding stream. It is a one-time source of
Sure.
money, and there may be ways that we can put that into programs that are like revolving loan funds, but I would be somewhat cautious of fully funding staff positions with those funds. I was taking a quick look at Sun Prairie because it was referenced that they did have some staff positions. And it looked, from what I could briefly tell, looking at their website, that those positions were funded through a combination of funding sources, using some money from the Affordable Housing Extension, but also leveraging general dollars or other TIF dollars or other resources in the city, rather than fully funding the position just with the affordable housing funds.
That is really helpful. Thank you.
What about, could you use it though, to say hire consultants to do the kinds of studies that Olivia's talking about?
I would think so, again, if it can be shown that those are in support of the affordable housing as required by the statute.
Because there's a lot of data we don't have. That we need.
Yeah, so like doing the assessment part. And then I'm gonna ask Daphne and Abby, if we decide, yeah, we want this like go-getter housing plan. Do you feel like you would need more staff help?
I think it fully depends on what the focus is. So if it's one-time incentives for a specific project, kind of like a WIDA incentive is provided, that is much less staff intensive than setting up something like a revolving loan fund, anything where we would be managing any grants in-house or any loans. We previously had a down payment assistance loan program, and that has taken a lot of staff time. And then more specifically, if the city decides to become or to work with a housing developer and actually become an owner of housing, then that's like next level where
Sure.
you're talking like, you know, the city of Madison CDA, where they probably have a couple dozen employees because they hire their own maintenance staff and their own leasing agents, and you know they're doing a redevelopment project of their Triangle site right now that will result in 1,200 housing units. So something like that would be really time intensive for staff. But I think kind of what it starts with is the plan and like understanding what the goals are, and then we could try to provide better information about what we think the staff workload would be.
Okay, that helps. Go ahead.
I was going to ask if we can take it back to the packet and specifically the excerpt, our housing chapter from the comprehensive plan.
Sure.
I'm looking at page 34. If someone can bring that up. And it just shows our 6 strategies under this chapter. And I would say, if you look at all of these, we're doing something towards these ends. The one that stands out to me, again, just because it's my district and I see this, strategy number 2, if someone's bringing it up. Okay, just want to make sure, is ensure that all land annexed to the city for housing is planned as a complete neighborhood that includes a range of housing types, a range of costs, and access to services, transit, and open space. And that was the case with both Bell Farm and Red Tail Ridge, because the idea is that there will be some services there. Transit, though, no, because they're far north side. And the Pheasant Crossing neighborhood won't have any commercial, so no services there, but it will be in proximity to Bell Farm and Red Tail Ridge, which will have something. So I guess we're doing okay on that one, but that one stood out to me. I'm wondering, we heard about or I don't know if anybody noticed, one of the actions in the regional housing strategy was to partner with private sector to try to get some funding for affordable housing. And it seems like we should try to do that. I wonder if there's a way to have like a campaign to match our affordable housing 1-year TID extension, $11 million. You know, could we imagine our business community trying to help us match that with private donations so that we double the amount of funds that we have available for this? Because Olivia's slides showed that that most people think it's local government's responsibility to address the housing crisis. And a majority also think it's the private sector, but it seems like they meant the development sector and not the employers whose job creation, you know, which we totally appreciate. That's what is driving the need for more housing. So I think it'd be great if we can look to the private sector, meaning our employers here. Sheboygan Falls was profiled in the municipality magazine about a year ago, I think it was. They have a development that's going in, it's probably mostly built by now, and all the houses, the target was supposed to be 250,000. I think it went up to 280,000. Home buyers could use the land, the value of the land as their down payment. And it was being funded a 5-way split among 4 employers and the county, Sheboygan County. And the 4 employers don't even have operations in Sheboygan Falls, but they're in the area and they have so many employees who have to commute from outside Sheboygan County that I think they each paid $2 million into this fund to build these houses. It's such a wonderful, example of a public-private partnership. And 80% of the units were reserved for people who are moving from outside of Sheboygan County to get closer to their employer. And yet people still supported this idea, even though, that most of the benefit was going to be to people living outside the county. So that's something to think about. I wanted to note on page 36 of the, I guess this is our comprehensive plan. It's page 36 of the packet. Bottom right corner, vacancy rates for multifamily rental housing. Now this goes out to 2018. I don't know what the more recent ones are, but you can see, to Abby's comment earlier about the misinformation we hear, why are we building more apartments when such and such a building is, 50% vacancy? First of all, we don't know if that's true or not, take people at their word, but these data indicate, no, we are actually well below what a healthy vacancy rate is. And that is helping to drive up the costs. And then, let me see. Page 43 of the document, with regard to down payment assistance, I already expressed my concerns about, putting too much stock in that. But it says that 18 households, right in the middle of the page, 18 households in Middleton received down payment assistance under a pre-existing down payment assistance loan program. And it just seems like 18 families being able to take advantage of this is not going to get us where we want to be. So I would want to understand why it was such a small number, how that whole thing worked out. And then finally, page 45 of the packet, there's a quote. It says, TIF has been used to incentivize 100% of the affordable housing that has been developed in recent years. It is the primary tool that Middleton has to incentivize affordable housing. And my question was, is that really true? What affordable housing did help to develop?
Most of them.
But where are they located? I guess is what I'm wondering.
So the most recent example was Autumn Ridge, which is in Tribeca. Jacob Klein has 125 units there.
Okay.
There are two developments on Lisa Lane that were also by Jacob Klein, Meadow Ridge and Oak Ridge Senior Housing, and those were incentivized with TIF. The Trata, the 125 unit on Parmenter was initially incentivized by TIF. The one that I can think of that was not is Kestrel on University. That did not have a TIP incentive. We have 23 units that are affordable at Market West Apartments that were incentivized by TIF. There's one unit at Cardinal Row at the corner of Parmenter and Lee Street.
Just one unit?
What's that?
Just one unit?
Just one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a 16 unit building and
Okay.
it didn't have any other, I mean, it was a fully market rate project and we decided that it was worth it to try to get at least some affordable units. And initially the housing committee was trying to negotiate for two, but they exchanged it for one 3-bedroom unit because of the proximity to the schools.
Okay.
So there's one 3-bedroom unit that's affordable at 50% AMI in that building. And it doesn't show up on, like when the county provides data on affordability, the ones that the city has negotiated separately don't show up on their radar because they don't have the traditional funding sources. So we always work with the county and explain the other agreements that we have in place.
Okay.
So the Mill Apartments is also an outlier that opened in 2024. It did not have a TIF incentive and they are a nonprofit owner. So it's actually a tax exempt property.
Very good. That's good to know. And I hope a future webpage will list all of our affordable housing units on our website.
That's a great idea. Could you do me a favor and just explain to anyone watching the meeting or anybody who's still confused, why is it an incentive to a developer to work within a TIF district?
If they have extraordinary development costs, then the city can assist with that by entering into an agreement where we would pledge to pay back some of their tax bills that they're paying for the incremental value that's being created by the project.
Thanks. I don't know how we want to do this, Brian, if you want me to get kind of a consensus without a vote on whether or not we want to have a housing plan, or we just move to the next item.
I mean, yeah, I think you can just give the general sentiment of the body if you want us to move in the direction of putting together some initial thoughts on it. Obviously, it would go back through formal channels before any formal vote, but just for the purposes of today's discussion, yes, a simple, are we headed in the right direction is sufficient.
Yeah. What do you said? What are you feeling? Yeah? Okay, cool. All right, let's move on to the next item, which is discussion of TID 3 affordable housing extension and the process. I think I'm going to rely on Bill for some of this.
Yeah, I've got a few slides I can put together, just go over the timeline and process and some of the estimates that we're taking a look at. We'll get that brought up. Okay, in the packet is a memo that fleshes this out in some more detail, but just wanted to go over the key items kind of in the timeline that we've been operating under. So the discussion that we're having is that we are at a point with the tax bills that were sent in December and the collections that are occurring right now, that we will have sufficient funds in tax increment district number 3 to pay the remaining obligations that we'll have this year. All of the external debt has been repaid, and that we'll have sufficient funds on hand to either prepay the remaining developer finance TIF incentives or to escrow funds as needed to pay those off. So TID 3 will have collected sufficient increment. That puts us in a position that the council could take action on an affordable housing extension resolution by April 15th of this year. If there is action by this April, then that would allow the tax bills that go out in December of this year, payable in 2026, to be used for this affordable housing fund. So that means the bills going in December, paid in January and July of next year, would generate a year of increment that could go to this new fund that would be used for affordable housing. And based on the current increment within the TID, I'm estimating that that would be between 10 and $11 million roughly, depending on the tax rates of each taxing jurisdiction. So if that action is taken, then we would proceed with the remaining steps for the closeout of TID 3. Our final date to incur any new project costs is September of this year. We'd be issuing the tax bills this December for the affordable housing extension. We would then have council potentially take action by April 15th of 2026 to formally close TID District Number 3. As soon as that action is taken to close the TID in 2026, that TID value would be removed from the 12% limit, which limits how much of the city's value can be within a TIF district, allowing for creation of new TIDs after that date. The first tax year that would be impacted by the TID closure would be the bills in December of 2026. And we would also receive a levy limit adjustment from the TID closure that would affect the bills going out in December of 2026 for the 2027 budget year.
And that brings it all down.
Yeah, and I'll touch on that in just a moment of what the impact of that is. So that would be affecting our 2027 budget year. We would do our final accounting and audit of the TID, have to submit that in a year after the closure resolution. So that would be by April 15th of 27. And then around that same time, once the TID audits are finalized, then we would be distributing the remaining balance of funds in the TID in 2027. So there's kind of two things going on. We would have the first action to create the affordable housing resolution extension. If that's approved, we'd be collecting money in 2026. That would go to a separate affordable housing fund. Separately, we would be closing out TIF District Number 3, finalizing the audits, and then paying out the remaining funds from TIF District Number 3. And then just to go through a little bit about each of those items and what that means. So first, looking at the levy limit adjustment for TIF 3. By state law, when you close a TID, you receive an adjustment to your annual levy limit based on 50% of the value of the TID compared to the total non-TID value in the city. So our estimated calculation based on current values of TIF District Number 3, about $700 million in increment. We take half of that value, divide that by almost $5 billion of non-TIF value. That comes up with a levy limit percentage of 7.1%. You'd multiply that by our estimated general levy at that time. That would generate about a $1.1 million levy limit adjustment. And that would apply for the taxes levied in 2026 for our 2027 budget. And the memo in the packet walks through some suggestions of things to consider. There are items that are currently being funded through the TIF district. Those would likely need to be incorporated into our general fund budget. There might be some opportunities to start cash funding for items that we currently borrow for, things that would save money in the long run, like short-lived vehicles, trying to put our contingencies at our target funding levels. And then there should be a balance of other funds available that could be considered through the budget process to address operating needs of the city. And because all of that tax base that's within the TID is going on to be as part of the general tax base, our levy, as well as the levies for the schools, county, technical college, will be distributed over a larger tax base. That allows the city to take advantage of this levy limit adjustment without increasing taxes, because there's additional non-TIF tax base that you're levying those taxes on. Also, because that levy limit adjustment is only based on 50% of the value within the TID, there would tend to be a downward pressure on tax rates. I never want to promise the tax rates are going to go down. For one thing, the city is only 30% of the total tax bill, and we have no control over the other taxing jurisdictions. But also, we need to look at the debt service levy, and the city may want to look at where our debt service levy is, what we have coming up for projects, if there is something for a facility project, and look at trying to manage that tax rate over time with the goal of continuing to have consistent tax rates rather than being in a situation where you may see a tax rate dip for 1 year and then only to come back up the next year. So there's a lot that would factor into that, and that's all things that would need to be considered as part of the budget at that time. So that's the levy limit adjustment from the TID closure. The other big financial impact of the TID closure is the residual balance of the TIF. So if we take the current money in the TID. We pay out all the remaining obligations. There will be a balance remaining. And once all the TID audits are completed, that remaining balance gets split between each taxing jurisdiction based on their percent of the tax bill. So for the city, that's about 30% of the tax bill. And on the slide here on the screen, it walks through our current estimate of what that final balance will be. These numbers will change based on final costs, but this is just our best estimate at this time. So if we look at where we are projecting the fund balance of TIF 3 in 2025, it's about 29 million. We do have some final revenues that would be coming in, some state aids and other aid that we'd be receiving. Then we would need to pay off any remaining project costs. The city has the ability to prepay any outstanding developer finance TIF bonds, so we would be prepaying those or setting aside funds in an escrow to be able to pay those balances. So with all of that being paid out, we're projecting a final TIF balance of just under 8.8 million. If you look at 30% of that, that would be the city of Middleton share, which is estimated about 2.6 million. School district would be getting the largest share out of that with over 50% of the tax bill, and then also a smaller piece for the county and technical college. That would likely be available in 2027 after we do the final TIF audit and close out. And this money, unlike the affordable housing extension, which needs to be used for housing, these funds can be available for any public purpose used by the city. The only caution there is that it is one-time money. It's a one-time source of funds from the closure of the TID. So I would not recommend this be used to fund new positions, for example. But a good use of that could be capital projects, facility projects, other one-time means of the city that could benefit from using these funds versus borrowing or another source. So that really kind of walks through the main points. There's some more detail in the memo. I'd be happy to answer any questions either about the affordable housing or the TID closure if there's any questions from the committee.
Phil, I have a question about the affordable housing projects. I know I've heard that there's some desire to have this be grants and others desire to have it be more of a loan situation. And I am assuming we would want to work with a bank if we were going to do a loan.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Or even both?
I'm sorry?
Even with grants, maybe work with a bank or no?
I think it depends on how the program is structured and what's being asked. And I think if there is an underwriting process, banks have the expertise of reviewing financial applications and looking at sources of income and balances and making those loan decisions. We don't have the staff time or the expertise on staff to be doing that level of underwriting. So if that's the intent of the program, I would recommend either working with a bank or a consultant that could help and have expertise in those areas.
And the benefit of doing a loan situation is that then there's always money. It's not a one-time shot like the ARPA grant. It can stay there and grow and continue programs, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think you could structure a revolving loan program so that as loans are repaid, that money goes back into a program and is available to fund new loans.
What kind of control do we have then over an interest rate? Do we just say,
I think if the city is establishing the program and using its funding for the program, the city would have the ability to set the interest rate.
anybody have any comments on that? Yeah.
I just wonder, so if we have the ability to set the interest rate and our goal in having revolving loans in addition to, the primary purpose, but we want the revolving loan so that we have continuing revenue. How would we set the interest? We'd have to set the interest rates high enough to make us not lose money over the long term by not investing the money that we have. Does that make sense? Like if we can invest it at 4%, that means our loan rate has to be at least that 4%. Otherwise, we're not really making money off, generating new revenue to use for that.
Right. There'd be the opportunity cost of not investing the funds as well as just the cost to administer the program, whether that is staff time or consultant or bank partnering. There would be costs of administering a loan program. So yeah, I think if you're trying to set it up as a sustainable program, you'd want to factor all of those things into the rate. And also then look at where that rate would be compared to private lending rates. And is that intended to make it more affordable, or is it intended to provide financing for people that otherwise are not eligible for financing? So there's a lot that would need to be considered in how you structure the program.
Can I ask some clarifying questions?
Please.
So, on page 48 of it's your memo, so the levy limit adjustment percentage of 7.12% does not mean that taxes would go up 7.12% in that year.
That correct. Yeah. The 7 point whatever percent, that's the amount that the levy or the amount that we're collecting can go up. However, because the tax base is larger, because all of the properties that were in the TID are now part of the general non-TIF tax base, you're spreading those taxes over a larger number of properties, and therefore you would not expect that to increase the tax rate.
I'm glad Brent is here because I think communicating with people in advance about this is going to be very important. Because as we know from our 2022 referendum happening in the same year as our property revaluation, and everybody thought, well, many people thought property taxes were going to go up 26% just because of that. And it's, you know, it's a math thing. A lot of people don't like math, but it's important that our residents understand that's not what the 7.12% means. And I guess, do we want to talk about on page 49, some of the suggestions for what, I know this is a very future thing, but I did want to bring up just a couple things about the potential uses of the TID closure levy limit adjustment. So this is the levy limit adjustment is not a one-time thing. That's an ongoing thing?
Yes, that is an ongoing thing. So if the city takes advantage of that levy limit adjustment for its 2027 budget, that would be part of our base levy built in future years.
Okay. And I guess my question is, so the cash fund for shorter life vehicle replacements of $250,000. I'm wondering why not put some of the 2.6 million that is projected for the total end of the TID. Why not put some of that into the cash purchase fund? And then that way we can spend this $250,000 per year to hire more staff to preserve our high quality services and the people who help make those possible.
Yeah, that certainly is an option. Part of the recommendation for at least considering that is that we have on an annual basis, it's been started at $500,000 a year, now up over $650,000 a year in borrowing that we're doing for vehicle purchases. And as part of our vehicle replacement plan, we're anticipating it to remain at that level or increase in future years as the cost of vehicles continue to increase. If you use part of the 2.6 million residual balance of the TID to purchase vehicles, you can do that. But as those funds are used, we will still have the need for other replacements in future budgets. So you may want to consider trying to build into our annual tax levy an amount for vehicle replacements and doing some of the things like squad cars, the toner quickly, and funding those through an annual property tax levy rather than an annual borrowing. Certainly not a requirement. There are options and pros and cons as we weigh the budget, but just some items for consideration.
Okay. So instead of always having that vehicle replacement plan contribution in the capital projects budget, you're suggesting at least some of it should go into our general fund.
Yeah, and I would say the distinction is really whether or not we're borrowing for them. So you could fund some municipalities have a levy that goes to their capital projects fund for things like that versus borrowing as the main source.
Okay. All right, that's good. And then looking at also this page, so the contribution to CDA, well, the top three are all funded by TID 3 right now. And since that's going away, I can see why those are suggested for the levy limit adjustment. So the $140,000 for the CDA. And I know we're going to be talking about the CDA in just a minute, but what it seems to me, the CDA spends some of that money on snow plowing and landscaping and banners and holiday lights and all for the downtown right now?
The banners are citywide. And the only other thing I would add is the other cost center, you named 4 of the 5. The other one is downtown events.
Okay. And how does the citywide banner project or program, how does that contribute to the statutory aims of CDA?
It's a great question. The CDA did review that at their meeting. I think it was their October 2024 meeting, and have begun scaling back that banner program. I think that the current membership inherited that. That's just the way that the city has done it for many years. Originally the banners were an initiative of the chamber, and then the chamber turned it over to Visit Middleton, and Visit Middleton decided that they didn't want to fund it anymore. And so it landed with the CDA, and it's been there for probably 10 or 15 years now.
Okay.
But they did direct that all of the banners on University Avenue be taken down, and they are continuing to review the other corridors where we have them.
Okay, yeah, because I recall that, I mean, one of the Workforce Housing Committee recommendations is to have council make the CDA citywide, not just downtown, and that's why it's surprising to learn banners elsewhere, not in downtown, are funded. But I guess, again, going back to trying to think of how to tighten things up, instead of giving the CDA the 140,000, should things like the landscaping and snow plowing, anything that could reasonably be considered a public works related activity, why not increase that budget by a
Yes,
commensurate?
I think that'd be appropriate, and to clarify my comment here, I'd say that we should look at those items that are being funded through that contribution to the CDA and currently by the CDA. And if there are things that we want to continue doing, building them into the levy, and whether that's a levy into the general fund and paid out of the public works budget or some other budget, we just need to review those because we will no longer have TIF as a funding source.
Okay. And then finally, the state law requires that at least 75% of the affordable housing extension or the housing final increment, that 75% of that would have to go to affordable housing, at least that much. But the Workforce Housing Committee does recommend at least 80%. There's a consensus, I think, on the committee that we'd like to see 100% go for that, but we recognize it's not a good idea to codify that in a resolution at this time because we want some flexibility. But whatever we don't use for affordable housing by definition, the balance needs to go to support housing in some other way in Middleton.
Oh, go ahead.
It's a
Sorry.
point of clarification, because TIDs are confusing. If we get this affordable housing thing from the TID extension, does that have to be used on projects that are in TIF 3?
No, it can be used anywhere in the city.
Anywhere in the city? Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Good question.
Yep.
Is there a possibility that constituents or residents could say, I'm mad that you're taking this money out for these projects. I would rather have the entire bunch of money to lower my taxes.
Certainly someone can make that argument. I think 2 items, first, the affordable housing extension, that's optional. The city doesn't have to use that affordable housing extension. If they don't, the impact would be that the TID closure would happen 1 year sooner. The other item would be the levy limit adjustment following the TID closure. And again, that's optional. The city is not required to take all of that. It can take some or none of that levy limit extension. My recommendation is that given how tight levy limits are and how limited we are by net new construction with no inflation factor, this is an opportunity for us to build some of those items into our budget or to try to address future needs and hopefully reduce the amount or delay the need to go to the community for a referendum. If you don't take advantage of that, it's just going to push those needs up higher that will need to be addressed in some manner.
Good. Just trying to think of all the angles.
I think that's a good question. Yeah, I really do. I'm glad that you brought that up. Because I'm trying to be sensitive as people do talk about inflation and the cost of living and the widows who can't afford the taxes anymore, like every little bit. And as long as we acknowledge that it's not easy and that we are trying to look at different options to help everybody. I am happy to listen if anyone has thoughts either way, but otherwise, thank you for your leadership.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right. Any other questions for Bill? I guess in the process and timeline, once we have this money for, if we decide on the resolution and we have this money for these affordable housing projects, how, granted, we don't know if we're going to do a loan or whatever. How do we get the word out that this is available? Like, do we put this out on our website? Do we have public meetings that say this is money that's going to become available to you? And then people, I'm assuming, will have to apply. Is there kind of a basic format that you can imagine?
Yeah, I think if there is action to do the affordable housing extension this spring, there'll be about a year before we actually have funds available because of the lead time. So it'll be the tax collections in January and July of next year that start to fund that. Those funds will be put in a separate fund, separate from the TID. They don't have to be used within the TID. They also don't have to be used within 1 year. They are available to carry forward. So I think that the period between now and the next year gives the city time to develop a plan, develop programs, work on getting communication strategy out so that when funds become available in approximately a year, we have those things in place and can have a website and other communication to talk about what programs are being set up and how people can take advantage of those funds.
Right. Go ahead.
If we could look at page 53 of the packet, I just wanted to make sure council members are aware of the draft resolution. Again, not for discussion or not for voting on today, not for voting on next month at our meetings, but before April 15th, we would need to pass this resolution. And the version that's showing, yep, it's got a little red comment. That's just a change to the be it further resolved to make a change to how we refer to the Dane County Regional Housing Strategy. And then the date under, instead of April 21st, 26, it should be April 15th of 2026, I believe. Is it April 15th?
Yeah, it is
next
April
year?
15th.
Okay. So this is the resolution that the Workforce Housing Committee is developing in conjunction with the CDA, and at some point before April, this will be in a council packet so that we can vote on it, and if the council is willing, and I hope you all are, so that we can vote on it to take that affordable housing extension. And I should note that this is pretty much like a template. It's there are specific requirements in state law. I think the department, is it the DOR who has the template available on their website? Yeah, so this is kind of cookie cutter. Not much that would need to be changed. We did have to explain what we would do with the funding, but there too, there's no need to be very specific about what we would do with the funding. It's not required under state law, so we decided to leave it as general as possible to give us more flexibility as we figure out what a plan might look like.
I'm gonna just kind of get people to give me how you're feeling about going ahead with this resolution. We would need to have it ready by April of this year. What's the consensus among the council? Yeah? Yeah? Well, okay, feeling like it's positive thing. How are you feeling? Do we need a small break? Yes, please. Okay. Let's break until 3 o'clock. I have foam rollers and I'm requiring everyone to roll out their muscles or use the restroom. 3 o'clock, back in session. We are back on to our next discussion item, which is the discussion of roles and responsibilities of the Community Development Authority, CDA, and workforce housing. Part of our effort to streamline staff time and efficiency has been to look at different committees and decide whether it would be a good idea to combine any of them. And this one's especially important, I think, when we talk about the roles of the CDA and workforce housing and whether or not we should combine them into one committee or change them in certain ways. So for those of you who aren't familiar with CDA, in some cities, they are much more involved in housing and helping people with down payments, et cetera. And let me, take a quick look at some old notes. And so there's been discussion, we had a joint meeting of CDA and workforce housing. And one of the constraints we have is that the state statute says that the CDA can only be 7 members. And so it's not just as easy as pulling the workforce housing committee in with the CDA and calling it, CDA or Affordable Housing Committee or something. But the trick is, we've also got some really amazing experts on workforce housing. So especially if we vote to extend the TID 3 and take this and pass this resolution, so we have this affordable housing project, it's going to be a big project for whatever version of these committees we have. So I would really love some discussion on whether we should combine these committees or whether we should keep them, given that after this TID 3 project is done, there's still really a lot of good workforce housing work to be done from a committee with some good experts on it. So I'd love some discussion. And I'm going to look toward Alder Haniro again to kind of help us get the discussion going, if you don't mind.
Sure. No, I'm happy to do that. And then for background, if you go to page 51 of our packet, you'll see that the Workforce Housing Committee in our draft recommendations that we discussed with the CDA, one of the recommendations is for council to change the scope and purpose of the CDA by making it a citywide authority, granting it authority over the city's activities related to housing, and then consolidating it with the Workforce Housing Committee. And that third item is both a reflection of, just the general desire on the part of the council to see consolidation of committees, commissions, and boards when it's appropriate and when it works. But also recognizing that the state statute really gives CDAs in municipalities the opportunity to have the authority to oversee housing. For whatever reason, I don't know the history of the creation of the CDA in Middleton, but it specifically limit or prohibit, I don't say prohibits, I forget what the wording is, but the council decided not to delegate the CDA authority over housing. So that's something that we felt needed to change. And I feel like if the Workforce Housing Committee and CDA are both creations of the council, it just seems to me if we were to be facing a TID extension right now and we had neither of these entities, neither CDA nor Workforce Housing Committee, we would create an entity to take this on. And given state statutes, provisions for community and economic or community development and housing authorities, we would create one entity and that would be the CDA. So that's sort of the, distillation of why it makes sense to have either one or the other. Now, we recognize, as Alder Nelson was saying, that this is a heavy lift, whatever's going to happen between April of this year and April of next year to develop a affordable housing program. That's going to be a significant amount of work. We can't merge the two right now because of the statutory restriction of 7 members. But we can have workforce housing and CDA work together through joint work groups over the next year, once we get going, to come up with that affordable housing program. And ideally, at the end of that year, we'd be in a much better position to consider the Workforce Housing Committee dissolving. We talked about this as a committee, that if we do our jobs right, we will put ourselves out of a job by empowering and training CDA to take on this work. And perhaps there will be members of or openings on the CDA that members of workforce housing can then be appointed to. So we have time to get this right and figure out the best way to consolidate these groups, if that is something that council is interested in doing.
And we don't have to decide this today. It's going to be a year before money is available if we go ahead with the resolution. And I'm wondering if I can ask Brian, I know you and I talked about the possibility of building more of an AHA and like kind of reconfiguring so that we're not as restricted to the numbers of a committee. But
What I was talking about, different states have different requirements in their statutes in terms of what they allow for entities in the city that physically would implement your housing implementation plan. The experience I was talking about is when I was previously employed with a municipality in Minnesota. They have a we allow heating to have that function.
sorry.
So the way that the Wisconsin statute is written, it's a bit more prescriptive in terms of the number of representatives you can have and the responsibilities they can be involved in. When we initially created our CDA ordinance back in the day, and I don't recall the date, we set aside certain activities that we were not going to be involved in and had those allocated or redistributed back to the Dane County Housing Authority. And so we would want to be sure we're very careful about which duties we select to take back on and which duties we want to maintain with Dane County Housing Authority. For example, things like Section 8 housing implementation is probably a responsibility we do not want to take in-house.
Right.
The county is a better suited entity than we are for that. So I think it would be, behoove us as we're taking this time to craft the housing implementation plan or housing action plan to think through, how we want those things to be. If there are certain things we want to delegate or continue to delegate to Dane County, or if there are things we want to take back, now would be the time for us to take the 6 months to a year, whatever it is, to figure out those sort of differences. But to answer your specific question about number of people, I defer to Matt, but I think 7 is the number in statute, and that's what we have to do.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. All right. That's our reality. Yeah.
I am wondering if Alder Jackson remembers a discussion that we had. So I'm going to defer to him, but it's about the county supervisor assisting Middleton in getting new caseworkers. Do you remember that? So our county supervisor worked hard in the budget season on behalf of the city of Middleton to obtain 2 caseworkers on housing. And it's something we have been quiet about only because it hasn't rolled out yet. But this might be a good place to bring this forward Because if you're spending the next year either as the CDA or as workforce housing or together, and as, you know, the assignments are provided, because usually you do a budget and then it's like 3 months later, you know, the project starts, or 4
Mhm.
months later. We're probably at that place where we're getting closer to the starting assignments, but if folks don't know about it here or our community, we need to get that word out.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
maybe it would be a great opportunity at a nearby future meeting, like at council, for her to be invited and speak to this, or ask her to invite our housing caseworkers to introduce themselves. And that may help you as you're doing some planning. So please, if nothing else, you can ask Alder Jackson for any other ideas, and maybe he'll know more as he soon retires. He'll probably have more capacity to brief us. So maybe he can come along and say howdy once in a while.
Okay. Is there any more that anybody wants to comment on this? I know if you're not on the committees, it's a little tough to like pipe up. Yeah.
I just look at, high level perspective. So CDA, Plan Commission, seems like the Plan Commission does a lot of work.
Yeah.
And workforce housing. And so I see like different responsibility pots. CDA, big picture stuff, right? Like really big picture. Is that what I'm gathering in terms of development in the city?
That would probably be more of the plan commission.
Okay,
Mhm.
right? Plan Commission. So
The way that it's structured currently, at least, the way that
the
it's,
Plan Commission also is required by state statute.
yes.
Yeah. And where I see workforce housing is very focused, right? I mean, it's for workforce housing, not all housing. And probably about the only thing, I pick up from kind of constituent wide and our developer wide thing is, hey, it takes us too long to get housing done, housing developed, housing moved along, housing projects. And I would imagine that doesn't matter whether it's workforce or not. So I guess in this whole process, can we I want to say speed up? We make sure we don't get in the way of that process. So people they get it. I think workforce housing is kind of specialized, and especially for the county, state funding, other funding sources, and having an understanding of that dialed into where the needs are in the community, who those populations are. And I think like anything, a subject matter expert, if you're on a committee commission, you invest yourself in it, like my co-elder does, and then they can speak to it in ways that the rest of us weren't involved. So, I mean, I sort of support it the way it is, if that's how it's happening. I don't know, CDA can take on workforce housing. CDA busy doing other stuff.
Yeah, sure. We have other stuff.
Well, if I may, one advantage that CDA has over workforce housing is they can issue bonds, as we heard, but they can also, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, and maybe I am, but workforce housing has no authority over funds, but CDA does. They have their own budget, their own part of our city budget, correct?
Yeah, the CDA is it's considered a component unit of the city. So once they receive an allocation, those are funds that were maintained within the CDA fund, and the CDA board has authority over those. Currently, workforce housing has not been dedicated with their own set of funds in a similar manner.
Yeah, I think that distinction is important. Go ahead.
You know, that's an interesting thought. And as I say that, I'm thinking of when I was on Arts Commission. I know Landmark struggles with that. You know, there's other ones that don't have funding or very small funding. But it could be something where that person, the chair or the alder on that committee could champion for budgets. And I think that the wisdom of both your leaderships is the interest in getting through the next year with the TIF closure, the potential for the affordable housing extension and working through that project, sharing expertise, as we move it forward. And I think it's just wise to have the conversation and put it on the radar, but to pause it till this large project goes through. And as it may take 2 to 3 years, really, to complete that, come back to this is more what I am thinking is that it's not a yes or a no, but it's a good time to just have that starter conversation. Because there's value, and we will definitely need help for our CDA members who have not historically done the robust duties of CDA. Our members have historically focused on the downtown, the celebratory things, the welcoming spirit of the downtown. And their energy and excitement for that is amazing. And to pivot towards housing and affordable housing and $8 million or $10 million to work with, it's intense. And so we somehow have to work through that heavy lift together. So I think it's a great conversation.
Yeah. Alder Schaefer?
I was gonna say that, but the mayor said it for me, did it beautifully. So, but I think I concur, the heavy lifting is really, to me, the next year. Until you get a plan in place for this affordable housing, you really don't know what the demands are going to be stepping forward from that point. And since even if one of the two were to dissolve next year, I think having both groups work symbiotically with each other would be important, and that make these decisions later on. I concur.
In the short term, I think it has been kind of agreed that the two committees are going to have joint meetings every other month for a while, kind of ease into this discussion. And I also can see a future where the arts committee can take over some of what I call the fluffy stuff that the CDA does, like the lighting of the green. Placemaking. And I don't believe we are restricted on the number of people in the arts committee.
No,
Which
I mean, we are under the current ordinance, but the city could easily
You
change
just
that.
amend it. Yeah. I think that that opens up some possibilities as we think about if someone is not wanting to go into the heavy housing stuff, they could be easily incorporated into the arts committee and do the placemaking. Elder Haniro.
Yes, and going back to, again, the distinction between the two. So I'm looking at our website right now for CDA, and it says the Community Development Authority oversees downtown redevelopment and workforce housing program. So that's interesting that it says that. And the state statute specifically says that the Housing and Community Development Authority, which they shortened to CDA, is a separate body politic for the purpose of carrying out blight elimination, slum clearance, urban renewal programs and projects, and housing projects. And as I totally appreciate the members of the current CDA and past CDAs for doing, the work that they've been doing to maintain the downtown. I would say, though, that it's a bit of a stretch to say what our CDA traditionally has been working on, or at least in recent years, is related to these statutory purposes of a CDA. So it's good to hear that maybe the Arts Committee does present an opportunity for people who want to focus on those things, like downtown events, to be able to do that, but just on a different group. Yeah, and one of my goals would be to try to get our CDA to be more like what the state statute envisions for a CDA.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a really perfect opportunity with this new big project coming that we get ourselves up to exactly what we should be doing on CDA. Any other comments on that?
Just quickly make one comment if it's okay. We do have a new position that is posted for recruitment right now on our website, and that's the placemaking planner position. And I would envision that person taking over staffing of the Public Arts Committee. And so that person, half of their time is dedicated to downtown events at Stonehorse Green. So if some of those duties that exist within the CDA now related to events downtown were to shift, that would be a very natural progression too with that new person coming on board. I also think that, and Katie knows this as well, that the makeup of the arts committee, I think, I don't want to speak for the committee, but I think that they would welcome the banners and landscaping and things like that, because they are a very creative group. And
we have thoughts about all of that.
yes, exactly. And while the CDA also has that expertise on their committee, I think that there could be a great opportunity to kind of rethink the Public Arts Committee and maybe even rename it the Placemaking Committee, or, something like that, and sort of expand their oversight.
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead.
Just adding to that, we might want to think about that license and ordinance topic for Arts Committee a little sooner than later on the number of people, because as I've talked to a few people that this might happen, is that we might have some migration of the duties. I've seen some people get really excited and volunteer and like, well, then can I join the Arts Committee? And I'm like, oh, we're already trying to move maybe a couple, one or two from CDA. So I just want to be very careful, and maybe it's just a good opportunity that instead of we saying ordinance, can we grow by 2? We might want to just say, maybe something like 5 or 6, or if you want to rename it, like just put it on there now. And that way, if it takes time, by the time a transition happens.
Who's on L&O?
Jeff and Alder Kalish and Alder Madden.
Okay, I will request an agenda item. All right. Anything else? And I feel like I've blended the items on the agenda 4 and 5. We've sort of done that. Okay with you guys? I'd like to move to discussion number 6, discussion of adjustment and start time of common council meetings. How do you guys feel about starting at 7 as opposed to 7:30? Alder Schaefer's got his hand up right off the bat.
Right off the bat, it's just my own personal, as I would like to move it to 7. We tend to eat later in the evening, and so sometimes if it's a long council meeting, it means a 10 o'clock dinner. And usually just sitting
It's
around.
très français of you to eat at 10 o'clock.
My preference is 7.
All right. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'll say my preference is 7 as well. I eat way earlier than Alder Schaefer. But we're always trying to find ways to lighten the load on our staff.
Yeah.
And I think starting at 7 o'clock instead of 7:30 means, a half an hour earlier potentially for the staff to get home after a long day of work. A lot of our peer cities meet at 7 o'clock. And I think the Finance and Personnel Committee would be the most affected by it because we meet, an hour before council meets. But it's, we typically can wrap things up unless it's a special kind of meeting. We can wrap things up in 45 minutes. So I think starting at 6 for Finance and Personnel would work just fine.
Great. Sounds like a good consensus. Anybody have an issue in the other way?
Well, and just a question, because I was thinking about personnel and finance starting earlier too, but when you do have longer meetings, budget or whatever, I know that sometimes you start earlier than 6:30. So, would you be starting at 5 o'clock, 5:30 for some meetings? So
Possibly with Indian food for dinner.
And then there would be no
Just
problem, I don't think, for every once in a while.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
we
every once in
publish,
a while.
if council has to start at 7:30, we
Yeah.
just publish that that's the start time,
Well,
right?
or, I mean, I appreciate Alder Crow's concern for, for the committee. But we do know well in advance, a year in advance, we have an idea of
When-
what time frame it is that we're going to be having these special longer meetings. And I think that as long as we all build
Yeah.
it into our schedule, that.
Yeah,
would be
and I
fine.
was just thinking about council members who work during the day,
Mm.
when that time might be a little bit harder.
All right. Alder Lorman.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I work during the day and I work a lot during the day, so sometimes it's late start times are really, that's why I'm able to be here.
Oh,
Um, so it's, common council's fine, it's like 30, it's the finance personnel, especially if we get into something longer, right? At 5 or 5:30. Like airport commission, for example, we do it online all the time. So I just know I don't do my hours.
but Alder Lorman, what if we didn't change the time of the finance? I mean, what if, is 6 o'clock okay for you?
That's what I mean, everything just gets doubled. I'm in favor of definitely starting common council earlier.
Okay, okay.
We're not here all night.
But on a long
It's just,
finance and personnel meeting night, instead of moving you guys earlier, just move council to later, right?
well, I don't know, I mean, if we.
So it doesn't
how often
push
do we have
you.
Those kind of special situations. Maybe it's okay to make exceptions if it's once a year.
Yeah, I think, yeah, a couple times a year during budget. We also in the past have sometimes done finance committee on a separate night. And maybe that's an option of having just a dedicated night rather than a couple of earlier starts, if that works better.
All right, well, I imagine that as it comes up, you guys can chat amongst yourselves and adjust the time as needed.
Yeah, as long as we have flexibility.
Can I ask, I don't know if Matt or Brian or Bill knows this, but do we need to specify the time of our meetings in our ordinance? I know we do right now, but is it possible to just specify the dates of the first and third Tuesday and not specify the time and then give this a try for a while and see how an earlier start time works? Or is it required that we specify the time?
I don't think we need an ordinance that says when we start our meetings. I mean, as long as we are noticing things
Yeah.
for open meetings law. To be honest with you, until you just said that, I did not realize it did specify the time.
We have two things
It's-
to fix.
Yeah. So, that shouldn't be an ultimate encumbrance to what you want to do.
Okay.
Yeah, well, there it is, sure.
Yeah, I like that idea. Great. All right, anything else? Sounds like that's a good idea. I'd love to get,
Or on that same topic, then, I guess in theory. Do that, but if like we really have a light agenda on a meeting, which is a dangerous thing to say because we talk about a stop sign for 2 hours.
yeah.
We say, well, the start time of this meeting doesn't have to be at whatever, we move a start time of a meeting by a half hour because of an agenda. Because it's a light agenda, so we save everybody some time. How much flexibility we as a body, the city wants to go down that rabbit hole.
I would just recommend trying to keep it.
Consistent.
Yeah, because if a member of the public is looking to give public comments or, future recruitment of alders when there's vacancies that, maybe we can all make it this time, but maybe others can't. Like you were saying, you work a lot. And so getting to finance, which is before it, but others might have like a little bit later shift. So,
Madam Chair, I think the intent with that is again to provide the public some understanding of, generally speaking, when the meetings are going to be on a consistent basis. So I think, again, we'd want to consult with the city attorney as we're crafting anything that would go to license and ordinances, but it would be something lines of generally, the council meeting will start at 7 p.m. So there is that flexibility. If we need to adjust in the future going forward, we can do that. But again, it's providing the sentiment to the community that unless, with the exception of rare circumstances, the meetings will start at 7 p.m.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Anything else? All right, on to future agenda items. Anyone have any suggestions for potential agenda items for future CAL meetings?
I support our ongoing, obviously, discussion of consolidation, time adjustments, and all that.
Cool.
And we should maybe just integrate it into it. If it's-
Strategic plan priorities. I know was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago that we met to discuss, it was in the courthouse that we had to have our meeting when we settled on the top priorities from the strategic plan. And I think we've accomplished some of them. Certainly the stormwater utility referendum is one. So I'd like to dive into the strategic plan and see what we need to do next.
It's a good one. Mayor?
I'd like to hear an update on complete streets. I know we have a lot of supportive, our council is very supportive, our committees are very supportive, and, are we like 3/4 of the way there? Do we need to do a little bit more? Are we getting most of the way there? I'm not quite sure, so I'd appreciate a briefing.
That's cool. Alder Schaefer?
Yeah, I don't know quite how we'd frame this, but it becomes clear as we're adding these hundreds and hundreds of housing units and people, that basic city services get crushed. And I think we have to look and start planning ahead. If our population goes up 2,000 or 3,000 people, or we're gonna deal with the influx on how many staff in various areas of things that are important. So it's a general topic.
Just adding to that, as someone was talking to me just this week about snowplow routes, and that I know that's only this time of year, but if we're adding all these roads, I know Alder Hanairo is getting a ton of them, but it's towards that far end of our district, and then Bishop's Bay, of course, is even further. And I thought that was a really good question, but it plays on what you're saying, because most of our stuff is throughout the year. But these things that happen, do we need the staff or the snowplow? What does that look like? And I can't answer that. I have no
Even as
idea.
it goes through plan commission, when
Mhm.
developments come in big areas like that. What extent of my years on plan commission, we didn't talk about those kind of issues. Responsibility is gonna be, we talk about that, but not how to fund and maintain the extra streets in the plaza. So.
Great idea. Thank you.
Alder Crow?
And this just came up recently, but if someone, excuse me, if someone has presented a petition to the city, say, what steps does that, and that may be more education for the council. How do we deal with requests from citizens,
I love that
petitions,
topic.
and how do we set up, say, a subcommittee, and what committee, who decides that? So.
I'm going to piggyback on that. This one was from, I think, an 8-year-old girl. She wants to know how to add recycling bins in the park. So if you need an example, I know we have a couple hot things out there that maybe we don't want to talk about, but every park, it's a lot of work to maintain what we have, which is what we're talking about. And we're such a green city. So it's kind of a little bit of all of the things. And I don't know what those steps are. So
Yeah, I
maybe
think
we
that's a
could.
great topic for Cal. That's a good one. Thanks. Anything else? All right. I just want to thank you guys all for being here today. I'm really happy. We got great discussion. Everybody talked. I'm so happy. So thank you for all of your input, and thank you to the staff. Thank you, Brian, for organizing lunch. Thank you, Alder Jackson, for bringing extra lunch or second lunch. And please, let's all do anything we can to help them clean up before we leave. But